It all begins on a mountain where a dark aura starts pouring out of a rift. Trapped at the bottom of the rift, the Prota hears a mysterious voice asking how he is feeling. The voice calls him the eldest young master of the Luoyang sword family. He tries to move with great difficulty, but the heavy chains anchoring him to the wall begin to rattle. Hearing the prisoner's groans of distress, the creature comments on how truly pathetic his situation is. The voice tells him he does not need to strain his throat to speak, reminding him that it has been watching him ever since they cut out his tongue. The man screams in silence and agony, but the entity explains that it can perfectly hear the voice coming from his heart. Completely disoriented in the darkness, the young master wonders in his mind who that mysterious presence could be. He panics upon realizing he cannot see a thing, and the voice reminds him that his wise eyes were gouged out with red-hot skewers. The voice continues the torment by saying that was not all, mentioning his delicate hands and arms that had never known hard work. It adds that the same happened to his fragile legs, which used to only stroll through clean and peaceful courtyards. The entity reveals that his limbs were severed one by one while he passed out from the pain, causing the man to finally remember. He gives a bitter smile as he realizes he had completely forgotten the reason why he ended up in such a terrible state. The entity comments that he must have been way too busy being tortured since a long time has passed since his arrival. The prisoner asks if the presence knows what happened to his family, and the voice finds it amusing that he is worrying about others now. His world shatters when the creature coldly reveals that his entire family was completely wiped out. The mysterious voice urges him to try and remember, to think hard about all the precious things he ended up losing. In his mind, the image of his family home being consumed by the flames of total destruction appears. He visualizes the scene of conflict and ruin, understanding the terrible price of losing the people he loved. The dark presence states that he already knows this pain all too well, bringing back painful memories from the past. The voice reminds him that his eldest sister tried to flee the clan's downfall, but ended up being severely beaten and lost her life to her own husband. It goes on to say that the second sister, despite being a skilled swordswoman, also could not escape the worst fate. The young woman had her energy center destroyed due to the family's fall and ended up losing her life at the hands of cruel bandits. The young master cries out in despair that he knew nothing about this, insisting that his family had strong warriors and talented siblings facing such despair. The creature merely asks if he truly had absolutely no idea what was going on. The voice asks if he did not know that after he left to become another family's son-in-law, his siblings started a bloody conflict. It reveals that the siblings brutally destroyed each other just to try and take over the vacant leadership position he had left behind. While all this tragedy was unfolding around his loved ones, the young master just kept reading his books peacefully because he ignored all the problems in the world to stay isolated. Reading, the creature asks if he was truly blind to reality. He swears he knew nothing and describes himself as an ordinary man, but the entity repeats the phrase, mocking his alleged simplicity. The mystical creature shows deep displeasure, stating that it finds his entire attitude extremely frustrating. To prove its point, the presence brings up memories from the past. Back when the man was still just a prodigy child, it reminds him that at just 4 years old, he was already helping his mother organize hundreds of medical texts into dozens of volumes. At 5, he advised the emperor on agriculture, and before 6, he predicted a great drought that saved thousands of people from starvation. The creature asserts that the greatest generals and strategists in history were nothing more than mere amateurs compared to him. With a terrifying and intimidating smile, the mystical presence asks if he can finally remember his true potential. With his head bowed, the man finally admits the truth, confessing that he had always known absolutely everything that was happening. He reveals that he was born under the destiny of the heavenly ruined star, and that if he took action in the world, he would cause the downfall of countless people. The presence laughs out loud and points out that even though he isolated himself to avoid tragedy, everyone around him ended up gone anyway. The man accepts the situation with sadness, realizing that at the end of the day, he could not escape the shackles of his terrible fate. With a resigned smile, he decides to leave the future in the hands of the heavens, believing that divine justice lets nothing slide. He trusts that even without his direct interference, those responsible for the malice will be punished by the law of return established by the heavens. A dark claw emerges from the crimson depths, while the creature calls that way of thinking extremely foolish. The dark hand grips his neck tightly, questioning why the heavens would care about such a weak and insignificant human being. The creature begins to envelop him completely, and promises to show him an ancient tale about how the world actually works. The narrative travels to an extremely distant past, to an era so ancient that nowadays it is considered nothing more than a great myth. In those times, there were people who fervently believed in divine justice and desperately sought spiritual enlightenment. Although many were totally convinced of this belief, cruel men kept committing terrible misdeeds without any punishment. The wicked lived in absolute luxury and passed away peacefully, while the vast majority of kind-hearted people suffered daily. These innocent souls spent their entire lives being severely exploited and met their end in pain, without even reaching their natural lifespan. Regardless of being good or bad, everyone who passed away turned back into a handful of dust in the exact same way. With that, the mysterious voice questions how anyone still dared to seek any kind of law of cause and effect. Behind all this terrible illusion of fate, the hidden truth about reality begins to slowly reveal itself. The mysterious creature asserts that there is nothing but the pure cruelty of heaven and earth toward mankind. To it, the truth is that a fair divine judgment never truly existed in this harsh world. The young master lets out a bitter smirk, mocking the ancient ideas of divine punishment and judgment. He begins to wonder if all of that was nothing more than a fantasy created by those who had already lost all hope. At that exact moment of great weakness, the entity asks him directly if he wishes to obtain power. The man answers immediately that he does, and the voice asks if he wishes to change everything and save his family. Without hesitating for a single second, he reaffirms with great conviction that he desires it very much. The entity warns that the price for this will be the eternal suffering of his own soul, with nowhere to go. He screams that he accepts the deal, determined to use every single one of his skills to seize this unique opportunity. The young master declares that he himself will rule over destinies, and the voice celebrates that he has finally revealed who he truly is. The mystical creature promises to give him all the necessary power and guarantee a new opportunity for a fresh start. He feels the dark energy violently invade his body, while a powerful physical transformation begins. The voice commands him to open his eyes and look at it, while one of his eyes begins to glow intensely in the darkness. Suddenly, all the heavy chains holding him to the stone wall break. Once and for all, he takes his first steps while the voice explains that the cover of that scripture was crafted from the skin of those who despised humans. The young master walks up to the book, whose inner contents were written with the very blood of those who despised the heavens. The voice explains that the book was bound with the sinews of those who despised the earth, uniting their paths through the same grudge. The mysterious book extends organic claws as the creature proposes to seal the pact for good to give him a new chance. The Proto accepts the contract without any hesitation and formally surrenders his soul to the darkness of the book. A massive explosion of red energy consumes the entire place as the voice hails him as the great chosen one of destiny. The entity reveals that the name of that sacred and forbidden book is the Scripture of the Dark, Sovereign. That specific power serves to replace the indifferent law of cause and effect of the heavens themselves. The voice explains that it is a scripture capable of defying the heavens and devouring all the malice existing in the world. The creature asks if his true desire is to judge the wicked and deliver the punishment they truly deserve. It guarantees that by uniting his strong determination with this dark power, everything will be possible in this new opportunity. From that moment on, the young master begins to breathe and live surrounded by the deepest darkness of the cavern. He finally opens his eyes, revealing an extremely sharp and completely renewed gaze, with no bandages on his face. He smirks, ready to bring the blade of retribution from the shadows as the dark sovereign who punishes all karma. A massive pillar of golden light suddenly explodes into the heavens above the Wangak Pavilion, the young master's residence. The grand wooden gates of the luxurious estate open quietly under the bright daylight. Inside the room, the Proto appears lying peacefully in his bed, seemingly sleeping in peace. Suddenly, his eyes snap open quickly from the shock and impact of the sudden awakening. The young man leaps out of bed, completely drenched in sweat and startled by everything he had just witnessed, heavily out of breath. He puts his hand to his mouth to check if his tongue is still intact and in place. He is shocked to realize he can breathe, speak, and feel his entire body perfectly again. Looking confused to the side, he recognizes the expensive books and vases decorating the luxurious room. He asks himself in shock if this is truly his old sleeping quarters in the Wangak Pavilion. He sets his feet on the ground, perfectly remembering the creature's promise that he would receive a new opportunity. Looking at himself in the wall mirror, he notices with amazement that he has truly been sent back to the past, with his body completely intact. He notes that he has returned to the time when he was only 17 years old, well before all the family tragedies began. At that moment, he hears a servant's voice from outside the room asking if the young master had coughed. The servant mutters outside, lamenting that the heir to the greatest family in the Central Plains has ended up in such a weak state. Another worker scoffs, saying he will just wake up and bury himself in books again, calling him pathetic for not using a sword. The man gossips, saying that despite the young heir's old reputation as a genius, it was all actually nothing more than a big rumor. The Prota finds it strange that he can hear their conversations so well, since the room's soundproofing should be perfect. He begins to realize that it was not just his hearing ability that changed drastically after this return. Looking at the palm of his hand, he sees a mysterious black and purple energy intensely emanating from his fingers. He notices that his physical endurance, his strength, and even his other 5 senses have drastically improved. He wonders if this entire massive flow of energy is the true power of the Jim Jincheon scripture. However, he notices something strange and begins to worry quite a bit about his own physical appearance. His body is filled with bloodlust and demonic energy, making him look like a completely corrupted human. He knows he cannot go out in public looking like that and tries to relax his face to look a bit more human, but as he tries to do so, he ends up hesitating for a moment upon seeing his own reflection. He reflects on the meaning of looking human, concluding that this question no longer makes sense now. He manages to control the energy and regain a normal, presentable face with a calm smile. With everything under control, he declares that the time has finally come to start taking action against his enemies. The youth takes a firm step and begins to walk barefoot toward the exit of his quarters. He pushes open the grand wooden doors of his room, revealing the bright daylight outside. He closes his eyes and takes a deep breath, letting out a sigh of relief as he feels the fresh morning air. He walks peacefully through the outer courtyard, catching the attention of one of the servants who is sweeping the floor. The servants immediately bow and greet him respectfully, asking if the young master had coughed in the morning. He looks up in awe at the sunlight, while a servant watches him, confused and quite tense. The servants begin to whisper among themselves, commenting that the young master seems even stranger and more spaced out today. The terrible chill of that endless darkness he lived in, before now seems to be fading away little by little. He raises his hand toward the sky with a light and much more peaceful smile on his face. All the bad sensations vanish completely under the warmth of the sun, and he calls over one of the whispering servants. He directly commands them to immediately assemble all the servants who serve under his orders. The servant gets extremely frightened and stammers nervously, not understanding the reason for such a sudden order. A short time later, a large number of servants line up in rows in the pavilion courtyard. They complain about the sudden summons and whisper biased jokes, calling him the swordless one once again. One of the men spits on the ground, irritated by the heir's silence and thinking he just wants to show off to the others. The young master walks calmly before them and asks firmly if all the workers have arrived. He casts a cold gaze over everyone present in the courtyard, maintaining a serene and unshakable expression. He announces that from that moment on, none of them are needed to work at the Wangak Pavilion anymore. He orders everyone to report immediately to the butler's office to receive new tasks within the mansion. The servants revolt against the sudden decision and shout furiously that they cannot accept such an abrupt order. The crowd joins in the complaint, saying they will be shamed before everyone and that they refuse to obey the order. He remembers how foolish he was in his past life for believing that his kindness would always be repaid with kindness. The Prota used to think that his sincerity and good heart would one day reach those selfish people, but now he realizes he only wanted to fool himself, flashing a slight ironic smile at his own memories. Some servants begin to mockingly chuckle very softly, thinking the young master will back down, just like he always did before. He places his hand over his face and begins to laugh out loud at all that audacity and petulance from the servants. He suddenly stops laughing and points directly at the servant who was leading the complaints in the courtyard. The worker gulps and responds, startled by the young heir's sudden change in attitude. When questioned about who he was, the servant states his title, and Yeon So-hyun confirms his own name with pride. He asks if the servants who openly defy him truly think they own this great family. The man stammers in complete panic as he realizes the gravity of the insubordination accusation he has just received. Yeon So-hyun coldly warns that the punishment for those who disobey and challenge their master can be extremely severe. He adds in a threatening tone that, at the very least, the standard punishment would be the loss of a hand or a foot. Completely terrified by the threat, the servant drops to his knees on the ground, desperately begging for his life. The man gulps and begins to break into a cold sweat upon realizing the young master is not joking at all. Several servants bow with their foreheads to the ground and plead, saying they have spouses and children who depend on them to survive. They swear desperately that they never intended to challenge him and beg on their knees for mercy. Yeon So-hyun merely places his index finger to his lips with a calm smile and asks everyone to be quiet. Seeing all the workers humiliated and bowing before him, he wonders if things were truly that simple. With a very satisfied smile, he mentally celebrates having easily gotten rid of all the spies who were monitoring him. He walks away, saying that the blame for their lack of discipline lay on himself for being too tolerant a master in the past. He coldly orders all the servants to pack their things and get out of there as quickly as possible. The servant desperately thanks him on his knees with his forehead to the ground, extremely relieved to have his life spared by his master. While the man is still on the ground trembling with fear, the Prota begins to give him new instructions to follow. He commands the servant to personally inform the head butler to choose someone of absolute trust to attend to him. The workers run away scared from there while the young master goes back to contemplating the sky calmly. He extends his hand under the bright rays, finding it very strange how warm the sunlight feels on his skin, but he realizes with sadness that despite feeling all that pleasant warmth, he cannot actually see the sun. He remembers the creature's terrible curse, which condemned him to live in darkness and judge the world from the shadows. Meanwhile, in another part of the massive mansion, a servant delivers an urgent report to the head butler's office. The messenger reveals that the young master removed all the spies who were closely watching him at the Wangak pavilion. Faced with the troubling news, the head butler stands up from his desk slowly and thoughtfully. He becomes extremely irritated, calling the young master an insect for daring to act behind his back in the mansion. The man reflects to himself that the day the heir would finally start taking action had arrived. Sitting in his office, the head butler confesses to himself that he already expected such a move from the heir. He finds it highly suspicious that after 10 years of showing no interest in anything, the youth has dismissed all the servants. The butler recalls that he never forgot the first time he saw the boy wield a sword in his childhood. Back then, the boy's stance while training with the blade was incredibly perfect and intimidating. He remembers being totally shocked and speechless in the face of such immense skill from the young boy. The man realized at that very instant that a boy so young already displayed the dignified stance of a sword master. The head butler understands that the era of merely watching the young heir without worrying has come to an end. At that moment, a beautiful young woman named Jung-ah quietly enters the office and greets him with respect. He welcomes her and asks her to step closer to the desk, as he has a matter of utmost importance to discuss with her. The young woman politely agrees and walks calmly toward the head butler's desk. He explains that he has always been very fond of her, and therefore took great care when deciding which master she would serve. He reveals that the family's line of succession is about to change, and the main heir will certainly be at the center of it. Leaving the final choice completely in her hands, he asks if she accepts going to work at the Wangak pavilion. Without hesitating even once, the young servant clenches her fists with determination and gladly accepts to fulfill his order. The butler trusts that with her intelligence and her special eyes, she will understand the young master's secret intentions. The young woman walks purposefully and reaches the main entrance of the imposing Wangak pavilion to begin her new job. She stops before the massive palace, admiring up close the grandiosity of the first young master's residence. She is highly impressed by the gigantic size of the place, remembering what the head butler had told her about the clan. One of the guards on watch wakes up from his nap, startled and nervous, asking if she is the new servant sent by the butler. Looking into his eyes, she is surprised to notice that the mansion guards were sleeping in broad daylight. However, she perceives by the flow of energy that they are no mere ordinary guards, but rather very powerful warriors. Maintaining her calm and a firm posture, she officially introduces herself as the main heir's new personal servant. The young woman extends her hand and shows the document with the official transfer order she received from the head butler. The guard lets out a long yawn and tells his companion to open the wooden gates so the young woman can enter. The servant finds it highly suspicious that strong warriors like them let her pass without doing any search of her belongings. Together, the guards open the grand wooden doors, which creak loudly across the palace's quiet courtyard. The young servant looks very closely at the landscape that begins to reveal itself before her after the gate opens. She comes across a beautiful and peaceful path filled with green trees and brightly illuminated by the strong sunlight. When she begins to take her first steps, the guard mentions mockingly that he had forgotten to comment on one detail. She stops walking immediately, becoming quite intrigued by the mysterious comment she just heard. Without giving much weight to the provocation, she continues walking solitary into the interior of the woods. Observing the surroundings of the woods better, the young woman realizes with a start that this is no ordinary forest path. Looking up, she notices an extremely complex and dense magical protection barrier covering the entire area. The young woman knows that if it were not for her rare golden eyes, she would have easily fallen into a deadly trap. The entire forest of the pavilion forms a magical barrier so strong that it gives the sensation of easily crushing any invader. Suddenly, the servant hears subtle footsteps and notices someone approaching amidst the dense woods of the pavilion. The young heir watches her hidden, intrigued to see that an ordinary girl with no energy can notice the magical barrier. Jung-ah feels a strange shiver and goes on high alert, realizing there is someone else there with her. She turns her face quickly, trying to identify the source of that mysterious presence in the middle of the forest. Amidst the dense mist of the forest, the first young master emerges, walking calmly toward the young woman. He approaches with light steps and asks, intrigued, how she can see him so well. There, with a slight ironic smirk, the heir comments that the young servant is truly very unusual. Yoonga widens her golden eyes in shock upon seeing him up close, becoming totally paralyzed with surprise in the courtyard. She feels strange and, staring into his eyes, begins to wonder where she truly is. Amidst a deep mental darkness, she sees a mysterious flame of blue light floating in the void. Suddenly, a terrifying demonic face with a glowing eye emerges before her frightened thoughts. Yoonga lets out a cry of terror and falls backward onto the ground, feeling as if she were sinking into deep, dark waters. Several dark hands begin to emerge from that cold, dark water to try and grab her and drag her downward. She screams in despair as the mysterious claws pull her with great force into the depths of darkness. The dark claws cover her mouth and envelop her completely, preventing her from calling for help or moving. In her deepest thoughts, she begs, crying in fear for someone to save her quickly from that terrible nightmare. She extends her hand with great difficulty amidst the void, desperately pleading for help from anyone. Suddenly, a firm and warm hand grips her hand tightly and pulls her back to reality. Yan So-yan catches her quickly in his arms the moment she loses consciousness and passes out on the floor. He observes her closely with curiosity, thinking that the head butler ended up sending an extremely interesting girl. Yoonga wakes up sometime later, lying comfortably on a soft bed inside a very well-lit room. She sits up slowly in bed, still a bit dizzy, placing her hand on her head and wondering confusedly where she is. Looking around, she admires the simple but extremely elegantly decorated and clean room. Stepping down from the bed in a hurry, she accidentally bumps into and knocks down a large stack of ancient books onto the wooden floor. She looks at the open book on the floor and comes across detailed illustrations of medicinal plants and human anatomy. Curious about what she found, she kneels down and places her hand over the pages to better analyze the content. She lifts the book with her hands and reads intently. Being impressed by the level of detail on every page, she realizes that the book teaches advanced medicine from various sects and breathing techniques for martial arts. Looking at the massive packed shelves in the room, she wonders if all the books in that place are similar to that one. She goes into shock upon realizing that extremely rare works that should only be in the Imperial Palace are right there in that room. Suddenly, she hears the subtle sound of the wind and turns quickly with much curiosity toward the open window. She closely observes some beautiful flower petals that begin to gently drift in through the bedroom window. The young woman pushes open the wooden sliding doors to look in more detail at what is happening outside. She lets out a sigh of deep admiration upon coming across the wonderful view of the pavilion's secret garden. Before her emerges a paradise-like scene with beautiful stone bridges, a river of calm waters, and many blossoming trees. She finds it fascinating that despite it still being winter outside the property, inside the pavilion feels like an eternal spring. The young master greets her from the garden and asks if she slept well, calling her to come down when she is fully ready. With her cheeks heavily flushed with embarrassment over the situation, she quickly responds firmly that she is on her way. Later, in a meeting room, the heir asks if her name truly is Young-ah. Sitting in his chair, he jokes, saying she was quite heavy when he carried her unconscious in his arms earlier. Extremely embarrassed by his comment, she apologizes and remembers the moment she ended up passing out in the middle of the forest. He asks if she does not remember falling straight into his arms, causing the young woman to yell in panic that she remembers nothing of the sort. He explains that he found her unconscious and warns that she would have been in great danger had she stayed exposed out there any longer. Touched, she bows deeply and swears with all her heart that she will serve the young master faithfully for saving her life. However, he looks at her seriously and asks if she decided to serve him of her own accord or if that transfer order is trying to boss him around. With an extremely cold and authoritative gesture, he tosses the head butler's official document directly onto the wooden floor. Yoonga is left in a complete state of shock and panic by the young master's cold and sudden rejection. Afraid of having offended the main heir, she presses her forehead to the floor and desperately begs for forgiveness on her knees. He sighs ironically, commenting on how funny it is that he went through all the trouble of saving her only for her to ask for the worst penalty now. Seeing her promise loyalty, Yan So-hyun notices the young woman's rare golden eyes and finally recognizes her from his previous life. He flashes a slight smirk, thinking about how ironic fate is for uniting them now, since they never got close in the other life. He watches her in silence, remembering that in the future, that servant would be known by everyone as the feared witch of the golden eyes. He breaks the serious mood and asks if she knows how to cook, leaving the young servant quite confused by the sudden change of subject. The young master leans in smiling and confirms up close with the young woman that he truly wants to know if she knows how to prepare food. A short time later, a very strong and bright fire begins to crackle cheerfully in the pavilion's kitchen hearth. Sitting in the kitchen, Yoonga laments with her hand on her forehead, thinking she is cooking only because she passed out on the forest path. She tries to organize her confused memories, totally convinced that she really saw a terrifying presence in the middle of the woods. She lets out a long sigh of discouragement, wondering if all of that was nothing more than a terrible and bizarre nightmare of her mind. To brush off the bad thoughts, she gives light pats to her cheeks and decides to focus entirely on preparing a good meal. While chopping the ingredients, she is surprised that she lost control so easily before someone everyone called weak and useless. Suddenly, the heir appears from behind asking if dinner would be meatballs, giving the young cook quite a scare. She turns around startled, and he says he finds it strange that there is anything more important to a cook than the dinner menu. Nervous, she says that the menu is indeed very important, and the master warns with a friendly smile that he is starving and asks her not to take long. With her cheeks heavily flushed with shyness, she responds softly that she will hurry up with the dinner preparation. She serves a true table full of delicious dishes, and the young heir praises her for the excellent work in such a short time. He invites her to sit down and eat along, but she politely declines out of respect for her own position as a servant of the mansion. The youth stares at her in an extremely serious manner and with a sharp gaze, directly ordering her to sit down immediately in the chair, faced with his firmness and authority and not making him repeat the order. The young servant finally accepts and sits at the feast table. He shows great friendliness and uses his chopsticks to offer a piece of flavorful food directly to the young woman's plate. She holds the rice bowl with both hands, completely surprised and very flustered by such great kindness from the young master. He keeps placing more food on her plate, while the young woman feels guilty for eating before her own lord. He stares at her with firmness in his gaze and tells her to start eating all of that delicious meal without hesitating anymore. Flustered by the situation, the young woman accepts the master's kindness and finally takes the first timid bite of the food on her plate. The heir asks with much curiosity if the seasoning is good, and she confirms with her head in a very embarrassed manner. Satisfied with the young woman's response, the master decides to grab a piece of food to try and savor the dish as well. He praises her talent cheerfully, saying the simple food has perfectly balanced and very delicious flavors. Quickly, he extends his completely empty bowl to her and asks bluntly for her to serve another round. He repeats the compliments with his mouth full, and with a satisfied smile on his face, kindly asks for another generous portion. The dark night falls over the pavilion while the voices from inside the room keep repeatedly asking for more food portions. With the plates empty, she apologizes for having no more food, and he decides to stop right there, even while still feeling a bit hungry. She asks surprised if the master wants her to prepare some tea, but he answers from behind that he prefers to drink a good wine now. Sitting on the roof under the moonlight, he finds it strange to still feel so hungry, blaming his dark cultivation technique for it. He lets out a slight smirk, wondering if the only price for rewriting his own destiny is having an insatiable stomach. Suddenly, the entity's terrifying voice whispers that things would not be so easy, while dark claws grip his face. The young heir is left in a state of absolute shock upon feeling the cold, demonic hands squeezing his face on the dark roof. A dense and terrifying dark smoke begins to emanate from his body and envelop him completely under the bright glow of the full moon. The mist of darkness consumes his entire vision and covers most of his face with an extremely dense and mysterious shadow. The demon whispers very close to the young master's ear, coldly announcing that the time of the agreement had finally arrived. With a heavy stomp of his foot on the roof, the presence excitedly commands them to start enjoying the night's hunt. Overtaken by the madness of demonic power, he leaps across the city roofs anxious for the start of his grand feast of souls. The scene changes suddenly to a bustling inn in the city of Luoyang during the dead of night under the moon's glow. The attendant warns that the place is packed, but the customer complains and points to a seat that seemed to be empty at the back of the room. The worker panics and tries by all means to stop the stubborn customer from advancing toward that mysterious table. Ignoring the inn servant's desperate warnings, the man approaches the table curiously to see who is there. Looking closely at who was sitting at the dark table, the man's face fills with sweat and absolute panic at what he sees. He is paralyzed with terror upon seeing sharp teeth devouring gigantic pieces of raw meat in a bizarre and brutal fashion. Yan So Yan had his face smeared with blood, devouring the food in an extremely savage manner directly with his mouth. While swallowing everything insatiably surrounded by piles of empty plates, he thinks anguished that this food is still not enough. The inn worker watches that entire terrifying and bizarre scene with his eyes wide in pure horror and panic. Trembling heavily with fear from head to toe, the man mutters in panic that the youth before them is actually a starved ghost. He begins to scream desperately for everyone to run, warning about the presence of a starved demon coming straight from hell. Without caring about the shouting around him, the heir keeps eating without stopping, thinking in his mind that it is still not enough. The heir stands up abruptly from his seat, catching the attention of everyone present in the inn. He turns his face coldly to the side, focusing his attention on a specific conversation that was taking place. With his arms crossed behind his back, the young master begins to walk in a very calm manner toward the counter. The customers who were eating watch him pass tensely, gulping and very afraid of his presence. He approaches the owner of the place and asks in a calm and direct manner how much the total value of his entire meal came to. The attendant trembles in panic before the youth and begins to stammer nervously, not knowing how to answer him. With a sarcastic smile on his face, the heir places a pouch of coins on the counter and says that amount should suffice. The workers thank him while trembling, while other customers whisper terrified whether he truly is an evil ghost. Back on the roof under the strong moonlight, he finds it very strange that all that food still has not satiated his hunger. He questions what in the world would be capable of satisfying his absurd hunger, wondering if he truly turned into a starved ghost. Displeased with this annoying situation in his stomach, the young heir merely shakes his head from side to side. Suddenly, he senses a different aroma coming with the wind and wonders where that strong and peculiar scent comes from. An extremely terrifying and macabre smile appears on his face as he finally realizes the true nature of that scent. Enveloped by a dense, dark smoke, he smirks and thinks to himself that it is a wonderful and delicious aroma. The scene cuts to a dark and quiet city street, from where it is possible to hear muffled sounds of physical assault in the alley. A man is brutally beaten and thrown face first onto the stone ground by armed thugs, bleeding heavily in the process. The thugs from the Black Bones faction stare at him with contempt, asking if he thought their faction was some kind of joke fallen on the ground and heavily injured. The man yells indignantly that charging 10 times the value of the debt's interest is an absurd and dirty robbery. The cruel collector stomps with all his foot's strength on the injured debtor's head, telling him to shut his mouth once and for all. The group leader orders them to stop the unnecessary beating and just take his identification plaque before they leave. One of the thugs bends down quickly and gathers the wooden identification plaque of the fallen and injured debtor on the ground. The boss laughs out loud mockingly, commenting that with that simple plaque they can sell everything he owns, including his wife and children. The poor man begs, crying in despair, for them to take only his life and spare his family from any future suffering. The thugs go back to beating him with cruel kicks, mocking that the debtor's old body would bring no profit to pay the debt. The boss makes malicious plans, but stops talking immediately upon hearing a mysterious and bizarre whistling coming from high up the dark alley. One of the armed thugs looks up startled and irritated, yelling loud to know which scoundrel was making that whistling. He furiously demands that the intruder show his face, while the other thug begins to feel a sharp headache from the high-pitched sound. The faction boss seriously orders everyone to shut their mouths, leaving his group's thugs confused and tense at his reaction. The group leader begins to break into a cold sweat from nervousness upon realizing that just the sound of that master's whistling was capable of shaking his soul. Unable to see the intruder in the darkness, he yells asking if the mysterious master has any business to settle with them. The 3 thugs position themselves in combat alert. While a dark and icy mist begins to surround them from all sides, sweat trickles down the faction boss's face, who gulps with the fear and tension that completely dominate the dark alley. Trembling and joining his hands in a sign of extreme respect, he pleads for the mysterious master to do the honor of showing his face. Suddenly, the subtle noise of a foot landing gently on the ground echoes through the quiet alley. Startling the group of thugs, Yeon So-hyun emerges walking slowly toward them, with his eye glowing in a purple tone and surrounded by pure black smoke. He faces the thug leader with an ironic smirk, leaving the man completely paralyzed with terror upon seeing him. With a maniacal look and sharp teeth on display, the young heir says he smelled something delicious and that it was right there. The faction boss goes into complete despair upon feeling the terrible and overwhelming intent to kill that emanates from the mysterious youth. In panic, the leader draws his sword and tries to attack, yelling for him to die, but Yeon So-hyun grips his arm with extreme ease. The heir squeezes the man's wrist with so much strength that he forces him to drop the weapon, while the boss screams desperately in pain. In a brutal and swift motion, the criminal's arm is severed, causing the boss to fall to his knees, howling in pain amidst the blood. The faction's other thugs take steps back in shock, yelling startled by the name of their mutilated boss on the alley floor. Without any mercy, the youth grabs the leader by the neck and begins to lift his body, while a black smoke gradually consumes him. With a macabre smile and splatters of blood on his face, Yeon So-hyun mutters with satisfaction that this is extremely delicious. The faction boss's body turns into dark ashes and completely disintegrates in the frightening young master's hands. A massive amount of skeletal and monstrous arms made of black energy emerges from the shadows around the prota's body. This macabre energy consumes all the vital force and the soul of the criminal who had been captured by the air in the alley's darkness. A massive whirlpool of red and black energy explodes on the alley floor, clearing all traces of that brutal transformation. The youth smirks in a frightening way, realizing with much excitement that there were still 2 thugs left for him to devour there. The 2 surviving criminals flee running in total despair, yelling terrified that the youth is actually a terrible monster. The 2 surviving bandits run desperate down the street, while the young heir observes them from afar in silence. Suddenly, the prota advances at an absurd speed, enveloped in pure shadows, catching up to them quickly. The bandit, with a shaved head and scars on his face, is completely paralyzed with terror upon feeling his approach. A hand bathed in blood rises threateningly in the air, ready to deliver the final blow without any mercy. He breaks into a cold sweat from panic and thinks startled that all of this can only be a terrible and bizarre nightmare of his mind. The criminal tries to run faster to escape that bloody hand approaching him without any mercy. The bandit lets out a desperate cry of pure pain upon being caught and brutally crushed by the overwhelming dark power. He knocks desperately on the grand closed wooden gates, pleading out loud for help from anyone. He cries and yells, asking why that monster is doing this, questioning why they of all people were the chosen ones. The young master emerges right behind him with a macabre smile on his face, totally surrounded by purple and black flames. He approaches very close to the criminal's ear with his sharp teeth on display, leaving the man in total panic. The dark entity coldly warns that those infamous men were merely the beginning of his long hunt in the world. Sometime later, the heir appears lying on the stone floor of the cavern, coming to his senses in a confused and groggy way. He opens his eyes slowly, looking around him in the cavern without managing to identify where he truly is now. Placing his hand on his head in pain, he remembers only having left that bustling inn during the night. He hears a strange noise of chains or stone doors moving and goes immediately into a state of alert. Looking around, he realizes he is inside a dark cavern filled with stone sarcophagi, shaking heavily. The young heir analyzes well the stone walls and wonders if he ended up stopping in an ancient underground tomb. Suddenly, a bizarre skeleton with eyes glowing in pink advances quickly in his direction in an aggressive manner. He observes the mummified bodies in the sarcophagi and notices that they look so real they could attack him at any moment. A mysterious voice echoes praising his calm, calling him the legitimate heir to the scripture of the Dark Sovereign. From the deep shadows of the underground tomb emerges a hooded and wrinkled old man with eyes glowing in pink. Without showing fear, Yeon So-yeon comments in a sarcastic way that the old man's voice sounds full of mold and rot. The elder lets out a hoarse and bizarre laugh of derision, finding amusement in the young master's sharp provocations. The heir continues with the mockery, asking if his teeth rotted and fell out just from a lack of oral hygiene. The elder says he likes him more and more, asserting that the sacred scripture has finally found an ideal vessel. The youth responds with seriousness and conviction that the demonic artifact merely found its true lord. The hooded old man lets out a hysterical laugh of satisfaction, commenting that he had never met someone so audacious curious about the boy. The elder asks what exactly a brat like him knows about the secrets of that scripture. He reflects that the book is an ancient demonic artifact with enough power to warp time and send him to the past. He knows that the scripture defies all laws of cause and effect, having been woven with the body parts of 3 immortals. He confesses to not knowing much beyond that and bows in a respectful way, asking for the wise elder to instruct him better. Surprised by the heir's attitude, the old man comments that the wielders of that power usually react in 2 ways there. He explains that the majority shows extreme arrogance, thinking they only lacked power, or falls into total madness. The elder notices that he is totally different from the others, and the youth notices that the old man started talking to him with more respect. The elder confesses with sincerity that not even he is capable of fully understanding all the absolute power of the sacred book. He explains that they used to say the book was made by furious immortals to contain the darkness, but its origins remain a mystery. The hooded old man reveals in a mysterious way that he himself is an immortal who has been studying the terrible artifact for many eras. Right after, he corrects his own speech in a melancholy way, saying that in the past he used to be a dignified immortal. He laments having fallen into that deplorable state in which he transformed into something less than the very dust of that cavern. He tells that he spent eras studying the book, but that each discovery merely brought even more mysteries without any answers. The elder reveals that despite all the difficulties of the path, he did not stop and could not stop researching by any means. The young master goes reflective upon knowing that an ancient immortal being spent so much time studying the book without unlocking its mysteries. The old man tells that many other powerful immortals tried to master that power in the past, but all ended up devoured by the book. With a look of expectation, the elder extends his finger and asserts that he can see in the young heir a great glimmer of hope. The old man says that the youth has already completed the journey's initiation rite, leaving Yeon So-hyun confused about the meaning of that. The elder cracks a terrifying smile and asks directly if the youth does not remember devouring the souls of those criminals. The Proto opens his eyes in complete shock upon starting to remember the brutality he committed under the power's control. In his mind emerges the terrifying image of himself covered in the blood of the criminals in the city alley's darkness. The heir understands the truth, realizing that his hunger was satiated by consuming the vital essence of those bad men from the alley. The old man explains that the more wicked men he consumes, the more the power of the scripture of the Dark Sovereign will be awakened. Yeon So-hyun perceives that he truly feels no more hunger, finding it bizarre to feel full from such a terrible act that defies nature. The elder says that this is the first and final requirement that the scripture of the Dark Sovereign makes of its heir. Yeon So-hyun wonders if the book was not made to swallow all the world's darkness of the mortals, in place of a lazy and indifferent heaven. The youth notices that eating is not literal, and the old man explains that those hands are starved ghosts from the scripture that help him devour within the demonic energy domain. Several dark hands begin to cover a bloody man's face, pulling him into the darkness. The environment begins to shake violently while stones begin to fall from the cavern ceiling. Laughing, the old man warns in a mysterious way that their time is almost up there. The elder says goodbye, saying they will meet again soon, wishing him a good hunt until then. The underground cavern continues collapsing with a roar on all sides. The scene then changes to the grand pavilion where the young master lives in his residence. Yoonga announces before the door that she has prepared tea and snacks for the first young master. While thinking about the things she has discovered since she arrived there, Yeon So-hyun asks merely for her to leave the things on top of the table, and the young woman politely agrees. The first thing she notices is the danger of the place where he sleeps, seeing several martial arts manuals and bamboo scrolls scattered across the floor. She knows that these records are extremely valuable, and that anyone who dared to spy on their content would vanish without a trace. The second surprise is his unusual behavior, as he ignores formalities and excitedly decides to prepare breakfast personally. The heir makes sure to pick the vegetables, help with the kitchen chores, and still insists on sharing the dining table with his servants. Even with the massive difference in social status between the two, he seems very used to doing all of that. Sitting at the table, she asks, somewhat hesitantly, if he truly wants her to eat along with him again. With a peaceful smile, he responds that it is not just for today, but that she must always eat there from now on. She says that a servant should not eat before the young master, but he merely tells her to start eating at once. Then the young woman begins to reflect on the third strange observation she made about his behavior. She notices in a very clear way that, no matter the situation, the heir does not show the slightest romantic interest in her. Yoonga finds this confusing, since her striking beauty always caught everyone's attention, being known as the Ice Flower. The second and the third young master of the clan also coveted her, but all the women who fell into their hands ended up missing without a trace. Because of that, she feared their attention and found it a relief that the first young master was indifferent, since her survival depended on it. She questions whether following the head butler's advice and coming to work for the heir to escape the other brothers was truly the best choice. A man with a scar on his face enters without warning and apologizes for the intrusion. Saying he needs to report something urgent, Yoonga gets irritated by the man's audacity and complains, saying it is a great lack of manners to interrupt the young master while he eats. The intruder explains awkwardly that a visitor has arrived, causing Yeon So-hyun to ask immediately who it is. The messenger tells that the visitor identified themselves as part of the Samjol Guard, coming directly from the clan's main house. Hearing that name leaves Yoonga in panic, because she knows that this guard is the personal armed force of the third young master. The man adds that the guards are demanding they hand over the servant who arrived yesterday at the residence. She realizes that the other two brothers have truly started to fight over her, and that the situation has finally reached this critical point. She questions how the guard dares to give orders to the first young master's staff, and the man says he tried to say the same thing. He justifies that they are acting under orders of the third young master, and that there was no way to refuse them directly, but Yoonga still blames him. With a firm gesture, Yeon So-hyun taps on the table and orders the servant to go meet them outside. Yoonga is completely shocked and worried by the first young master's sudden order. He says coldly that they are making too much noise and tells her to just go hear what they want, causing the young woman to reluctantly obey. She thinks that no matter how arrogant the third young master is, trying to take her by force while ignoring the rules is crossing all limits. While Yoonga leaves saying she will return soon, the young master tells the messenger with the scar to stop right where he is. The man with the scar gets very confused and asks if the young master is truly speaking to him. Hearing a direct confirmation, Yeon So-hyun asks who gave permission for him to enter there as he pleased, and the man stammers, saying he knew he should not have done that. The master questions why he entered even knowing it was forbidden, and the man tries to explain, saying the gate guard was not at his post. In an ironic way, the youth asks if the absence of someone gives the right to invade his house, leaving the messenger terrified. The man bows deeply, asking for sincere apologies, and swears that a grave mistake like that will never repeat itself. The heir accepts to forgive the mistake just this once, but orders that, from that moment on, he be the new fixed messenger of the main gate. The man is left totally incredulous and shocked upon hearing the unexpected punishment he just received from his master. To make matters worse, Yeon So-hyun warns that his access is now restricted and that he will not be able to enter any place other than the loadings. With a provocative smile, the young master says that if he does not like the decision, he is free to try acting without permission again. The messenger accepts the order irritated, thinking about how he was demoted to a simple gate guard because of his mistake. Yeon So-hyun asks why he is still standing there, causing the man to run out of there quite awkwardly. Outside, a warrior of the third young master complains irritated about the terrible treatment he is receiving as a visitor. Young-ah introduces herself in a polite manner and greets the arrogant warrior who just arrived. The third young master's warrior demands to be taken inside to speak directly with her master. She firmly refuses, saying the first young master did not give entry permission and tells him to state the business right there. The man gets furious and begins to draw his weapon while calling Jung-ah crazy for her audacity. He advances against her totally out of control, yelling about how she dares to provoke him in that manner. However, Jung-ah remains firm in her spot, facing the attack without showing any sign of fear. Suddenly, a loud collision noise echoes and interrupts the warrior's strike before he could hit her. The man with the scar appears by surprise and blocks the intruder's attack with his own sword. He positions himself in front of her, warning that that is a restricted area and that authorization is required to pass through there. The third young master's warrior yells in anger, asking who he is, and tells him to get out of the way if he has nothing to do with it. The new gate guard activates his red energy and gives one last threatening warning for the intruder to back down. The third young master's warrior begins to sweat from nervousness upon realizing the opponent's terrible energy. Already irritated by his recent demotion, the guard decides to release his dangerous aura to teach the cheeky visitor a good lesson. Intimidated by the rival's power, the warrior coughs nervously, backs down, and says his only issue is with the pavilion's servant. He turns directly to Jung-ah and cruelly orders her to accompany him to see the third young master at once. She responds with total contempt that the third young master has no authority whatsoever to decide where she must go. The warrior gets indignant with the servant's boldness, but she calmly retorts, saying she is only following the family rules. Furious, he says he wants to see if she will maintain this arrogant stance before the third young master and tells her to behave until then. Upon leaving, the man grumbles that his master hates using anything that has already been used by other people before midway. The warrior ends up bumping into a butler from another faction, and the two exchange looks of pure contempt. The new butler who arrives greets the gate guard and says he seems to be working quite hard in that place. He officially introduces himself as the administrator in charge of the lake garden, belonging to the second young master of the clan. He delivers a letter to Jung-ah and, in an arrogant way, demands that she take him immediately to the first young master. She maintains her firm stance and refuses entry, asserting that the young heir is not receiving any visits at the moment. The new visitor looks suspiciously at the gate guard and asks if it is true that the young master really forbade visits. The guard confirms the lie and tells the butler to leave the letter with the servant and get out of there, leaving no other option for the man upon delivering the correspondence. The lake garden butler gives a serious stare and tells the young woman to remember the message well. He whispers in an intimidating way in her ear that, no matter what she plans, she will always be in the palm of his master's hands. As soon as the visitor leaves, the gate guard comments that the first young master never gave an order forbidding visits. The guard confesses that he has no liking at all for the heir, but decided to lie on his own accord out of his personal judgment. He explains that he only helped because he dislikes seeing someone so young suffering, and asks if she is trying to be loyal or just protect herself. The man raises a question, asking why she thinks the young master did not resolve that entire situation with a single word. The guard says goodbye, telling her to deliver the letter once and for all, leaving the young woman thoughtful and confused by his questioning alone. She begins to reflect on her life since she was sold to the Loyang sword family, and the people she cared about. Jung-ah realizes that despite everything, she never stopped to truly think about what the true concept of loyalty means. She notices that she merely returned what she received, and realizes she was treating the main heir in that exact same mechanical way. The young woman finally enters the office and delivers the letter sent by the second young master into the heir's hands. Without even opening the envelope, Yeon So-hyun tosses the letter directly into the embers to be totally consumed by the fire. Jung-ah is left extremely shocked by her master's drastic and unexpected attitude in burning the message like that. She desperately alerts him that the letter was from the second young master of the clan, but he merely responds with total indifference that he already knew. The young woman explains that that message likely dealt with her own transfer and destiny within the great family. Worried, she asks if the master is absolutely sure that there are no problems in ignoring the contents and not reading the letter. In a very calm way, he responds that if the matter were truly important, his brother would have come to speak in person. Next, he directly questions why she herself did not read the letter if she was so curious, leaving the young woman confused. He repeats with tranquility that she should have read the paper before if all of this was bothering her head so much. Startled by the suggestion, she responds that a humble servant like her would never dare commit such a grave betrayal. With a light smile, he drops the subject and calmly suggests that the two stop with that to have some tea. Junga asks timidly if a humble servant like her can also have tea with him, and the young master gives an affirmative answer. She accepts the master's kindness and takes a sip of the hot tea in a very polite and quiet manner. While they are sitting at the table, Yeon So-hyun calmly comments to her that the beverage's aroma is truly wonderful. Holding her cup, she keeps thinking about the reason why the young master asked why she herself did not read the letter before delivering it. Suddenly, a memory comes to her mind, and she begins to piece together a bizarre detail about her meals with him. She recalls that the young master always insisted for her to eat first before he touched any food on the table. Junga widens her eyes in complete shock upon considering the terrible possibility of the master testing if the food was laced. She concludes that the true reason they prepared and ate together was because he simply did not trust her at all. Jung-ah covers her mouth, devastated, realizing that to him, she was just one more untrustworthy person among so many others. She stands up suddenly and declares that, at the end of the day, she was also just one more unwanted outsider in that pavilion. Yeon So-hyun keeps his eyes focused on his reading and merely agrees in a cold and direct way with her statement. The young woman takes the opportunity to apologize for the delayed report and for having made up the excuse that he would receive no visits. She calls herself foolish, confessing that she pretended to know everything, but in reality was completely ignorant about what truly mattered there. She unburdens that perhaps she was just rushing to stand out and that her mistake was working a long time without ever truly serving anyone. With determination, the young woman kneels in a respectful way on the office floor before her lord. She asks with sincerity if he would accept her case. She decided to dedicate her life and swear absolute loyalty to him from now on. The heir closes the book, stares at the young woman for a few moments, and mutters thoughtfully about the sudden proposal he just heard. He seriously questions if she would be capable of keeping this oath even in the face of terrible dangers and everything she might discover about him. With her striking golden eyes glowing intensely with determination, she asserts with absolute conviction that she is capable of doing that. He asks what she knows about his father, and she responds that she heard say the great patriarch is bedridden dealing with the clan's business. Yeon So-hyun reveals that it is not an illness, but that his father has been in a coma for a long time due to a toxin, leaving the clan under the command of a committee. The youth tells that because of this, he needs to look after his own food at the Wangak Pavilion, since he was little, and asks if she can imagine how many attempts he suffered. Jung-ah goes trembling with terror at the revelation and confesses in a sincere way that she does not even dare try to guess a number. He warns that that is just a small sample of the Luoyang sword family's darkness, and asks if even so she still wishes to serve him. She bows again in a humble way and earnestly asks for the young master to allow her to serve him faithfully from now on. The heir accepts the request and delivers the paper back to her, ordering her to read once and for all the last page of that letter on the sheet. It is written that if she confessed the truth, she should be treated like a pack animal, but if she tried to negotiate with the heir, Jung-ah trembles with terror upon reading the final passage that explicitly suggests the young master should just eliminate her and get rid of her body. With tears in her eyes, she is devastated and does not understand how the head butler, who was like a true father to her, could suggest something like that. Drinking his tea in a peaceful way, the master asks if now she finally understands the real reason he showed that report to her. Wiping the tears from her face in a hurried way, the young woman responds with her head bowed that she understood her lord's message. She says it was about loyalty and deduces that the master wanted to show her what the true meaning of that feeling is. The young master smiles and comments that he considers loyalty a madness, questioning how else they would explain someone discarding their own child for that. He faces her and asks if, even knowing all of that, she still wishes to go ahead with the decision to swear her loyalty to him. With a flushed face, she responds that acceptance depends only on him, but that she has decided to simply serve him with absolute devotion. She declares that he is her only master, and Yeon So-hyun opens a beautiful, satisfied smile, praising the excellent answer she gave Nightfalls, and the scene turns to the beautiful illuminated image of the Wangak Pavilion under the full moon's light. Back in the office, Young-ah begins to reveal her past, telling that her family managed a merchant guild led by her father. She recalls with affection the time when she lived in a very harmonious way alongside her father and her beloved older sister. However, the happy life she had was about to change drastically due to a terrible twist of fate. She tells that the guild went through trouble, and they resorted to a dangerous loan from Yeomwang, which ended up ruining their family for good. She explains that in the beginning they lure victims with low interest, but that it is a cruel scheme to charge 10 times the original value. After several failed attempts to save the business, the debts became unpayable and she and her sister ended up being sold to other families. He asks if the older sister truly was of age to help in the guild, and Young-ah asserts proudly that she was always someone extraordinary. She reveals that her older sister managed to establish herself in the city of Luoyang to restart her life. Young-ah tells, with a smile, that nowadays her sister works as a quite well-known and respected informant in the region. Upon hearing about her sister's profession, Yeon So-hyun repeats the words thoughtfully, finding that information quite interesting. The young woman adds that she recently received a letter from her sister, saying she had finally discovered who caused their family's ruin. With much anger in her gaze, she says she will never forget the name of the heavily built fellow with the repulsive face named Geumjil. Upon hearing this name, Yeon So-hyun is surprised and questions about Geumjil, while the young woman explains that this was the nickname by which they knew him. Yeon So-hyun asks if her sister truly works as an informant, and Young-ah responds in an affirmative and respectful way. Drinking his tea, the young master says it must have been a long time since they saw each other and decides that the two will visit her sister tomorrow. Upon hearing the wonderful news, Young-ah opens a radiant smile and asks, totally enthusiastic, if he is being serious. He smiles and says they can spend about half a day there, allowing her to fully enjoy the reunion with her sister. On the following day, Young-ah appears dressed in an elegant way and alerts the young master that she is already completely ready for the trip. Yeon So-hyun evaluates her from top to bottom and asks if those simple clothes are the best she has, leaving the young woman somewhat insecure. He says the garments are too humble for a servant accompanying the heir of the Luoyang sword family and yells, calling for the gate guard. The guard steps closer, complaining about being called that, but the young heir tells him to be quiet and keep fulfilling his role. The heir orders the guard to go to the inner courtyard and bring high-quality female clothing for the servant to use on the trip. The guard with the scar on his face gets indignant with the outrageous request and questions with anger what his master just said. Irritated by the ill will, the master threatens to demote him to a manure carrier of the Wangak Pavilion if he does not go fetch the clothes immediately. Terrified by the terrible threat of demotion, the guard swallows his pride and promises to return with the request as quickly as possible, while he runs at a surprising speed. The guard laments revolted for having dedicated his entire life to that clan to end up like this. He runs complaining that the young master lives locked up using orders from his father as an excuse and decides to endure everything until he gets his transfer. The guard returns empty-handed and warns that the administrators refuse to give the clothes, claiming that the young heir knew very well the reason. While Yeon So-hyun goes reflective, Young-ah comments timidly that it is already getting late and suggests they depart as they are. The master slips his hand into his tunic sleeve, commenting that because it had been a long time since he went out, he ended up forgetting an important detail. He firmly strikes a heavy golden object against the startled guard's forehead, who lets out a cry of pain from the sudden impact. Upon seeing the shiny object that was thrown, the guard is left breathless upon recognizing the item and hears the master tell him to go back there and show that the young heir complains that the man talks too much and kicks him out of the room, telling him to run along to fulfill the job. Young-ah watches everything very surprised and asks, startled, if that mysterious golden object would truly be what she was thinking. The master shows the golden object and confirms that it is exactly the official seal of the sword families. Patriarch Young-ah looks impressed at her clan's supreme golden seal and questions how the young master managed to obtain such an important item. With a clever smile, the youth responds that with his father in that coma state, no one besides the legitimate heir son should carry the seal. The golden seal of the Luoyang sword family was a gift from the previous emperor, serving as a symbol of absolute authority and mystical artifact. She questions the use of something so valuable to get servant clothes, but he explains that he already used the seal for trivial things, like buying books. Young-ah is left completely perplexed and jaw-dropped upon knowing that an imperial treasure was routinely used for such mundane purchases. Suddenly, Wu Huiyan, the female administrator of the inner courtyard, arrives at the place accompanied by several servants to greet the young master. She warns that she brought personally the requested items, causing the master to ironize that everything would have been easier if they had cooperated before swallowing her own pride. The administrator trembles with anger as she agrees and warns that the group will withdraw immediately from the location. She and her entourage of servants withdraw from the courtyard, leaving behind several boxes filled with luxurious fabrics and clothes of the finest quality. Upon seeing the richness of the brought fabrics, Yunga hesitates and comments worried that such fine and expensive clothes do not match a servant's position. The master retorts saying she now lives at the Wangak pavilion and that as things are changing, she will have many occasions to wear clothes like that, moved and touched by her lord's thoughtful words. Yunga squeezes her own hands in a very firm and decided manner. She looks at the main heir with deep gratitude glowing in her eyes and respectfully agrees to accept his order. The bustling city of Luoyang was always the political and economic heart of the continent, growing as a gigantic commercial center of millions. In the middle of the city's grand avenue, people begin to point, whispering and commenting, marveled about someone who was passing by. Everyone on the street praises Yunga's stunning beauty, causing the guard with the scar to irritably rebuke the people who kept pointing. The citizens back away, startled upon noticing that the man accompanying the young woman is an elite warrior belonging to the influential Luoyang sword family. While they walk, the guard finds it very dangerous for the young heir to walk through the city's bustling streets without any escort warrior nearby. The man complains about having turned into a mere escort when suddenly the young master alerts that he has other matters to resolve and will go out alone. The guard goes into panic and begins to scream desperate, asking if the master truly intends to leave his own escort guard behind. With all the calm in the world, Yeon So-hyun confirms he is going alone and expressly orders him to focus only on protecting Yunga. In the next blink of an eye, the guard looks startled to all sides, realizing that his master simply vanished without leaving a trace. He curses irritated and warns Yunga that unfortunately she will have to look after her matters alone because he needs to go after the master. Yunga smiles gently, saying she knows how to look after herself and tells him not to worry, as she feels nothing bad could happen to the master. The guard begins to run through the streets, ranting about his lord's absurd speed, and decides to search for him in the surroundings first. Using his incredible martial arts skills, he begins to leap swiftly over the roofs of the bustling city's houses. Standing at the top of a roof, the guard laments that even concentrating his inner energy to track, the heir vanished without a trace. Sweating from nervousness with the mysterious disappearance, he wonders, intrigued, what the true hidden identity of that young master could be. Yeon So-hyun walks alone to the front of a wooden door in the city's dark alleys. Slowly, the heavy wooden door begins to open, creaking in the silence of the night. He takes a step inside, and a voice coming from the darkness comments in a direct way that he finally arrived. The hurt man invites him in a very humble way to enter his somewhat simple residence. Looking around the house's outer courtyard, the artisan lets out a sigh of astonishment upon seeing the state of the location, furious. He claims that the scoundrels from the Black Bones faction also invaded and vandalized that part of his house. In panic, the artisan runs desperately through the courtyard, yelling for his wife and asking if she is okay. The wife and small children run to him relieved, while the woman despairs upon noticing the injuries on her husband. Crying with emotion, the man embraces his beloved family in a very tight way in the middle of the illuminated courtyard. While they cry with relief for being together and safe, Yeon So-hyun merely observes them in absolute silence. Suddenly, the artisan remembers the young heir present there and faces him with an expression of surprise. The man kneels pleading for forgiveness and swears he will pay every coin of the debt if the master spares his limbs from being severed. The wife and small children cry copiously, pleading on their knees for him to spare the family father's life. The man soon calms his wife, explaining that that young gentleman was actually the one who saved his life on the street. Extremely surprised by the revelation, the woman lowers her head in a humble way before the heir. With deep gratitude and respect, she makes a full bow, sincerely thanking him for saving her husband. The entire family remains bowed on their knees on the floor before the heir, showing their eternal gratitude. The artisan stands up with a timid smile and asks for the youth to at least accept a humble cup of tea in his house. With tranquility, Yeon So-hyun agrees and accepts the hospitality invitation to spend a few moments inside there. Upon serving the beverage, the man confesses sheepishly that the tea leaves are of cheap quality and fears displeasing his refined palate. The young heir takes a sip of the simple tea and praises it with sincerity, commenting that the beverage's aroma is excellent. The artisan says he does not know how to return the favor, but the master waives that and changes subject, asking about the Black Bones faction. He confirms and explains that the Black Bones faction is a criminal group led by Geumju, daughter of a fellow named Geumjil. He reveals that the sect commands everything from loan sharking to illegal gambling houses, acting as a gigantic criminal organization. Yeon So-yeon asks why he ended up in a gambling house, knowing that the loan sharks act in a cruel and cheating way. The heir recalls that he and his father created interest limit laws in the past, and the man explains that the loan sharks use gambling to bypass that. The young master drinks a bit more of the tea and asks if the artisan knows of any more details about Gumjil or his daughter Gumju. With his head bowed, the man comments melancholy that simple people like them do not usually know almost anything about these criminals. Yeon So-yeon closes his eyes for a brief instant in a thoughtful way and responds in a calm manner that he understood the situation. He stands up politely from the table, thanks them for the offered cup of tea, and alerts that it is already time for him to leave from there. The artisan pleads for him not to go and asks at least for his name to return the great help one day, but the master prefers to conceal it. The man asks for him to wait an instant, saying that even being humble commoners, they do not want to let their savior go away empty-handed. The young heir diverts his gaze thoughtfully, analyzing the situation and the feelings of that humble family. In a corner of the artisan's creation workshop, several theater masks made of wood are scattered across the floor. Yeon So-yeon walks in a calm and decided manner toward the traditional wooden masks scattered in the corner of the room. He picks up one of the masks, which is totally white, and declares that he will accept that simple object to clear all debt of gratitude upon seeing the item chosen by the youth. The artisan widens his eyes and stammers in a complete state of shock and incredulity. The artisan reveals melancholy the truth about the object and confesses in a sincere way that it was not he who sculpted that wooden piece. The man points out that the mask is so unfinished it lacks holes for the eyes or nose. Besides having a quite imperfect surface, he tells that it was the last obsessive work of his deceased enraptured father and that he planned to destroy it for being considered cursed. Holding the unfinished object, Yeon So-hyun questions for what reason he thinks his father decided to leave exactly that piece behind. The artisan responds in a confused way, asking how a man who had totally lost his mental sanity could have any logical reason. The master cracks a light smile and asks if something striking happened to the man's father before he lost his head for good. Highly shocked, the artisan stammers, asking how he knew of that, and confesses that in the past he had a very talented brother in the craft. He recalls that his brother was unjustly accused of a crime, and his father pleaded for the help of an influential inspector from Luoyang, whom he knew. He laments that the corrupt inspector demanded an enormous bribe and, desperate, they had to resort to the Black Bones faction to borrow money. However, all the effort of paying the exorbitant bribe was in vain, and what they received back was only his young brother's cold body. The family cried copiously in pain on the backyard floor, discovering later that the corrupt inspector himself had executed the youth personally. He reveals that the tragedy had a trivial motive, because corrupt officials made a bet to compare the value of their personal riches. He explains that one of the corrupt ones used a masterpiece of his father in the bet, causing the young master to question the outcome of that bizarre story. The artisan reports that the defeated official took revenge, framing his brother unjustly, and his father protested at the town hall daily. The inspector forged slander accusations, causing guards to beat the artisan's old father in the middle of the public square for protesting. To guarantee that the mask creator never sculpted again, the corrupt men cruelly crushed the old man's 2 hands until destroying them. The artisan had to carry his helpless and handless father back home under the sad gaze of the entire family. After that day, the old man locked himself forever in the workshop, and the son only saw him again on the day of his sad passing. Upon listening to the whole story, Yeon So-yeon asks if even so the artisan still has not understood the real meaning of that mask. The man bows on his knees before the master and pleads for him to explain, because he never understood his father's last creation. The youth holds the object and reflects that obviously that unfinished mask could never have been sculpted in a perfect way. After all, the old man was completely enraptured, with his hair loose, drooling, and without eating absolutely anything for a long time. Since he had no hands, he sculpted the wood using only his toes, leaving them totally bloodied from the effort. The only thing that kept the old man's dying body alive was pure fury, fueled by the hatred and unbearable suffering he felt. And in the exact millisecond in which he finally finished sculpting the mask, the old man gave his last breath of life. With the tragic end and the accumulated hatred of the artisan, a terrible and dangerous cursed object was just born in the world. The conceptual image shows how the tragedy shattered the souls of that entire helpless family under a terrible darkness. Yeon So-hyun perceives that a soul consumed by grudge and suffering could not depart from the world, guiding his steps up to there. A dark figure wearing the white mask emerges imposing and frightening before all the darkness of the location. The image reveals the lifeless body of one of the victims of that terrible sequence of tragedies and injustices. He reflects that only after seeing the tragic end of everyone is that the old man found peace, understanding the reason for him creating a mask without holes for the eyes. It was not because the old man could not sculpt the eye holes, but rather because he consciously chose not to do that. Feeling the hatred and the power of the cursed object, Yeon So-hyun cracks a frightening smile and begins to laugh. He puts on the mask, feeling that the old man simply could no longer bear opening his eyes and contemplating the rot of that world. The scene then changes to the dark staircases of a hidden and gloomy alley in the grand city of Luoyang. In a room, a professional tattoo artist carves with much patience designs of black skulls on a muscular man's shoulder. The tattoo artist comments in a sarcastic way that the brute added one more skull, a sign that he just ended another person. He finishes the current design and asks the client if he liked the result, so he can continue the work on his arm. With half of his face covered by cloths, the muscular man tells him to stop the service immediately and leave them alone in the room. Suddenly, the wooden wall of the location is violently breached and destroyed with a roaring impact. Several intruders dressed in black and armed attack by surprise the brute who was relaxing on the room's sofa. Instead of despairing, the strong man cracks a sadistic smile and whispers with derision that he was precisely waiting for that one of the masked assassins, advances swiftly dealing a lethal blow with his sharp sword in his direction, with a gaze glowing in pure hatred. The brute prepares a colossal and overwhelming punch to counterattack the assassin. He lands a direct and brutal punch on the masked intruder's face, who lets out a whimper of pain upon being crushed by the strike. Right after, another assassin leaps from the shadows trying to land a treacherous blow from behind against the strong man. However, the brute reacts with absurd reflexes and blocks the lethal attack directly with his bare hand's strength. He throws the opponent against the floor with a frightening brutality, destroying the room's wooden planks with the impact. The muscular man continues tearing the enemies apart with devastating physical strikes and without showing the slightest mercy. His heavy steps echo through the destroyed room while he walks toward the survivors of the attack. He raises his colossal body surrounded by a reddish energy, facing the fallen and defeated intruders on the floor. With a final punch loaded with destructive power, he knocks out the last assassin who still tried to keep standing in the room. Surrounded by the corpses of the assassins, the brute lets out a sadistic laugh of pure satisfaction for the overwhelming victory. He mocks the defeated intruders, saying that insects like them could never hide the weakness of their strikes before him. Laughing with derision, the strong man turns to the startled tattoo artist and alerts that he will need 4 more skulls marked on his body. A muscular man with similar scars suddenly appears on the ceiling and comments in a mocking tone about the mess his brother made. The younger greets the older brother with excitement, and the newcomer tells that he heard a very strange gossip from the thugs down below. The younger brother stares at the older with curiosity and asks in a direct way what exactly his men are saying out there. He recalls that merchant beaten previously and reveals that in an unbelievable way, his shop reopened as if nothing had happened. He finds out that his family was ended and that the new owner of the location is actually a fellow with the appearance of a pale scholar. Upon listening to the unusual physical description of the intruder, the strong man furrows his brow in a thoughtful way and repeats the words with suspicion. The brute questions himself, irritated, who would have the insane courage to reopen and profit in a shop confiscated personally by Lord Gyeomjil. The two gigantic and frightening brothers begin to walk side by side through the city streets, decided to resolve this affront. The two brute brothers finally arrive at the shop, and the younger announces the arrival to the older brother. The older brother stares at the young master sitting in the office and questions if that youth is the scholar fellow of whom they spoke. The younger says he also sees him for the first time and thinks he looks too young, asking if he could be a disciple of the old artisan. While the intruders converse, Yeon So-hyun continues sculpting patiently a small wooden Buddha statue. Decided, the brothers begin to walk inside and suggest asking the answers directly to the youth himself. The brute cracks a sadistic smile and asks in an abusive way where the old mask artisan fled to. Without saying a single word, Yeon So-hyun stands up and places on his face the frightening unfinished white mask of the deceased artisan. The younger brother hesitates, startled by the macabre image, and tries to calm down, thinking that that mask transmits a very dark energy. The other gigantic brother approaches with threat, staring at him from above and telling the brat to answer the question asked previously. From behind the white mask that totally conceals his eyes and his identity, the air remains unshakable and silent. In a very calm way, he merely rests the newly sculpted Buddha statue upon the wooden table before him, with a dark smile under the mask. He questions in an enigmatic way if the two criminals by chance know the true face of Buddha. The brute brothers look at each other confused and ask with derision what type of religious and nonsense blather the boy is speaking. Yeon So-hyun walks coldly outside and comments that it would be of no use to discuss the path of Buddha with low-life criminals like them. He positions himself in the center of the outer courtyard with his back to the duo, maintaining a totally confident and imposing stance. Totally irritated by his arrogance, the younger suggests grabbing the boy and beating him until he opens his mouth, obtaining his brother's endorsement. The larger of the brothers advances with heavy steps that make the ground shake, mocking that the pale brat is not worth even the strength of one punch of his. However, before he can attack, the brute hears a strange noise coming from the mask shelves and turns around confused. He comments intrigued that he knew his thugs had totally destroyed that shop and stolen everything that seemed to have any value. He notices that the shop and the masks are in perfect state and wonders if that would be dark magic, leaving his brother equally confused. The younger brother gets tired of the futilities, opens the door, and enters the next room, asking if it was there that the masked brat entered. In the next second, a demonic and frightening laugh echoes from the absolute pitch black of the dark room, leaving the brute on immediate alert. A purple mist and dozens of skeletal hands of starved ghosts sprout from the floor and violently grab the startled warrior's legs. The man yells out of pure terror and agony upon feeling the forces of his vital essence being drained quickly by the touch of the lost souls. A gigantic, dark, and monstrous hand emerges from the darkness and advances fiercely against the cornered warrior's body in the room. The claw of darkness squeezes the brute's neck with an absurd strength, causing him to howl in pain while he struggles desperately for life. He tries to loosen up with his own hands, but the demonic energy claw continues squeezing and crushing his neck with extreme cruelty. Outside the gloomy room, the older brother listens to the desperate screams of agony and suffering echo through the mask house. Desperate, the younger yells for help to the older brother, who runs swiftly in the direction of the dark room to try and save him. The older brother widens his eyes in a complete state of panic upon witnessing the grotesque scene that was happening right inside there, before he could do anything. One of the dark hands emerges from the floor and grabs with extreme strength the older brother's ankle. The powerful warrior lets out a howl of despair upon perceiving that he is also being dragged relentlessly to the room's absolute pitch black. He tries to dig his fingers into the floor's wooden planks to avoid being pulled, but his nails only scratch the ground ineffectively. While he is swallowed in a violent way by the purple mist, the man desperately pleads for help before vanishing completely from the room. The house courtyard is flooded by a gigantic purple mist, while the last cry of agony of the two brothers echoes through the alley's silence. The souls and demonic entities of the scripture of the Dark Sovereign amuse themselves and laugh sadistically after devouring the two criminals. The purplish smoke begins to dissipate slowly through the shelves, covering the several traditional wooden masks of the shop. Silence finally returns to the abandoned workshop, with the demonic energy calming down and vanishing back into the artifact. Hours later, Yeon So-hyun appears sitting in absolute silence in the middle of a peaceful forest to continue his sculpting work. While he works sculpting the small pieces of wood, he reflects to himself that he still has not managed to understand a certain enigma. He notices that imitating the physical form is not enough, and wonders what the true facial expression of the Buddha he met in the past was. The heir finally finishes his meticulous manual work and declares satisfied under the sunlight that the work is concluded. The small statue sculpted by him reveals a Buddha with a totally smooth and unfinished face, identical to the design of the artisan's white mask. Before the simple grave of the artisan's family, Yeon So-hyun deposits the Buddha statue and calmly declares that now everyone can rest in peace. He swears retribution against the Black Bones faction and Gyumju, whispering that they can mock, laugh, and try to humiliate him as much as they want now with a determined and gelid gaze. The heir declares that the mockery will be the only form of resistance left for his enemies. The scene then changes to the beautiful and gigantic Luoyang Pavilion under a blue and clear sky by day in the grand and prosperous imperial city. Yunga's older sister, the famous city informant, comments serious that the Grand Luoyang sword family is in complete political chaos. She says that the successor's power grows each day and that the bedridden Grand Patriarch's influence is considered by everyone as finished. The informant reveals that some groups in the city's underworld started inclusive to spread rumors about a new case of secret poisoning. Yunga laughs and says that is foolishness, commenting that that matter is not ideal for those who just reunited after 10 years of separation. The sister smiles and provokes Junga in a subtle way, commenting that she, by all appearances, still has not managed to win the first young master's trust. Junga takes a sip of tea, knowing that that is only a blatant provocation from her sister to try and discover the clan's secrets. Placing the cup on the table with firmness, she retorts saying she will not fall for provocation, and that the question is not about having trust or not. The sister asserts that the reason the Sword Clan entered a political collapse is exclusive fault of the first young master's attitudes. With a forced and irritated smile, Yunga argues that since the heir is not the clan's interim leader, they cannot blame him alone for that, irritated by the firm response. The sister faces her with arms crossed, asking how she dares to retort and questioning her own position. Yunga furrows her brow, showing plenty of irritation with her older sister's insistent and meddling stance. The informant confesses she was incredulous to discover recently that her younger sister decided to transfer to the heir's Wangak pavilion. Yunga concludes in her thoughts that her older sister obtained this transfer information at the same instant as the clan's other brothers. Holding her pipe, the sister comments that she cannot imagine what her plans were to choose to serve precisely the first young master. In a disdainful way, the older questions why she chose exactly that heir who is known pejoratively as the swordless man with an extremely intimidating and furious look. Yunga directly orders in a sharp manner that she never repeat that offensive title near her. Surprised by her younger sister's sudden aggressiveness and determination, the informant lowers her voice tone and asks for apologies for the comment. She explains that by working with espionage, she knows the heir is not ordinary, but ponders that the clan's grand patriarch has been isolated for 10 years. Standing, she adds, worried that the first young master's rivals and other brothers accumulated absurd military forces. In this meantime, she questions what the heir could do at this point in the game, and Junga responds enigmatic that she will understand if she just observes. Suddenly, Junga's golden eyes widen in complete alert upon feeling a dangerous energy vibration coming from the outside. A violent roar echoes through the hallway, startling the two sisters and abruptly interrupting the quiet conversation they had inside there. The office's grand wooden doors are completely smashed and shattered with an overwhelming physical force from intruders. Several gigantic thugs invade the weapon room and surround the two women, ordering in a loud voice that they capture the mistress of the Luoyang pavilion. Upon facing the encroaching intruders up close, the two exclaim horrified upon perceiving that it deals with thugs from the Black Bones faction. Junga finds this impossible, because attacking a neutral and protected information agency in broad daylight would be pure suicide mission for them. The criminals praise the mistress's beauty and advance to attack them, causing Junga to scream desperate for her older sister's safety. A scoundrel extends his wrinkled and repulsive hand to grab the informant, while Junga bellows desperate upon seeing the dangerous scene. The scene then returns to the bustling commercial street of Luoyang, where people walk peacefully under the clear light of day. The guard with the scar reappears sweating cold and yells desperate upon spotting the young master. Asking where on earth he walked all this time, Yan So-hyun stares at him with a gelid gaze and questions irritated if the servant is yelling at him, causing the man to back away awkwardly right away. While the heir calmly eats a skewer, the guard kneels explaining that he became extremely worried upon seeing Junga walking alone. With an enigmatic and very peaceful smile on his face, the young master asks if she would be in danger, doubting that something like that would happen. The guard with the scar on his face stares at him totally confused and asks without understanding what exactly the young heir wants to say by that. The master merely maintains silence, displaying a discreet mocking smile that leaves his servant even more intrigued and tense with the situation. Back at the Luoyang pavilion, Junga suddenly alerts that she will borrow her sister's long pipe to use as a combat weapon. With swift and surprising movements, she spins the heavy metal object with all her strength in the direction of the enemy closest to her. She hits squarely the temple of the sect's first thug, dealing a violent and precise physical blow that makes him yell out of pure pain. The struck brute collapses with violence and totally unconscious against the floor's red carpet after the impact suffered. The other thugs of the criminal faction take a step back in complete shock upon seeing the unexpected physical power displayed by a mere servant. Jung-ah positions herself in guard with the metal object in hands, facing the opponents with a glowing golden and very intimidating gaze. One of the leaders tries to intimidate her with derision, warning that it is not a good idea to act in such a cheeky way since she is not a martial artist. The older sister also despairs from worry, thinking to herself that there is a clear limit of strength for those who do not master martial arts. Even in obvious numerical disadvantage, the young servant maintains herself firm in the room's courtyard, facing the brutes without backing a single centimeter. With her back to the intruders, she calls for her older sister with a serious and very concentrated voice tone amidst that danger situation. Squeezing the metallic pipe with both hands, she asks in a practical way how much time exactly she needs to resist fighting against them there. The informant responds that she needs to endure 15 minutes at most, time necessary for the pavilion's security traps to activate. One of the men advances with a malicious smile, warning that the small talk time is over and that now they are going to use real strength against her. Three armed criminals leap fiercely in her direction at the same time, yelling that the two brought that terrible punishment upon themselves. The first thug tries to deal a direct and crushing punch with all his physical strength against the cornered young servant's delicate face. Thanks to her special ability, her golden eyes glow intensely upon predicting and calculating the exact movement and breath of the attacker. Young-ah manages to dodge the trajectory of the lethal punch in a millimetric and surprising way, leaving the enemy completely without action in the fight. The brute widens his eyes in complete shock and panic upon perceiving that his punch failed miserably and hit only the wind. There, Young-ah takes advantage of the chance to counterattack, landing a certain blow with the metal pipe on the intruder. The struck brute alerts the others that she is no ordinary girl and tells no one to hold back. Another criminal curses, irritated, while the young woman continues dodging and attacking with speed. He yells in pain upon being struck with strength on the head, all under the close gaze of the pavilion owner. Young-ah's sister watches the scene completely perplexed by her tremendous combat skill. She is surprised that the younger fights so well against the faction's elite, even without ever having trained martial arts. One of the Blackbones faction leaders gets furious with the humiliation and draws his sword, cursing the girl. He advances, fierce, yelling that she will only learn when she sees blood, while her sister yells to take care. The attacker leaps with everything to deal a fatal blow from top to bottom in Young-ah's direction. However, with an extremely swift and precise movement, an attack cuts the air and strikes the enemy's face. The young woman lands a violent sequence of blows with the metallic pipe on the opponent's face. She finishes the combat, giving only a gentle touch with the object's tip on the last opponent's shoulder. The man collapses on his back on the floor, completely knocked out, leaving Young-ah out of breath after the effort. The sister asks if she learned swordsmanship at the clan, but Young-ah says she only observed and asks if much is still lacking to manage to end a fight with one blow. The pavilion owner says not yet and gets intrigued, thinking about what the younger meant by only observing the others. While all the defeated thugs continue falling across the floor, heavy steps begin to approach the entrance. Someone enters the location asking with disdain what is happening inside there. Upon seeing that scene, Young-ah recognizes immediately the mysterious person's tone of voice who just arrived and goes alert. It deals with Gumju, who enters accompanied by her thugs, calling the defeated pathetic for having been vanquished. The Black Bones faction leader cracks a mocking smile and complains that that place's hospitality is horrible. She walks imposing through the room and orders all her pathetic thugs to get out immediately from there. The pavilion mistress faces Gyeomju seriously and alerts that such audacious actions will bring grave consequences. Gyeomju disdains, saying that one does not treat a guest like that, even more without even serving a cup of tea. The mistress retorts, saying she can only be joking, but the villainess only mocks, saying her mind seems to have jammed. Gyeomju argues that if she were an enemy, they would not be whole, while her servant cracks up laughing at the back. The sinister servant performs a swift and sharp strike with his bare hand in direction of the pavilion mistress. The informant does not even move while the sharp wind passes right close to her face in a threatening way. A small nick appears on her cheek, trickling a thread of blood, but she maintains the impassive expression. Gyeomju praises her courage for not even blinking and says she would like her men to have a bit of that audacity. She walks through the room, commenting that her thugs have been suffering many ambushes frequently lately. The pavilion mistress retorts that this is simply the price paid for an aggressive expansion of territory. The villainess says she has a strong gut feeling that the informant is behind this, but the mistress questions creating chaos over mere intuition. Gyeomju asks with derision how she thinks she managed to find her precisely at the moment when her defenses were empty. She reveals having obtained a true information source and says she will no longer be controlled by amateurs like them. The mistress asks if that source accused her, but the villainess denies and says it does not deal with just any ordinary small group. Gyeomju begins to explain that it deals with the most powerful place in all the region of Luoyang, Henan, and the Central Plains. To prove her partnership, she displays with pride a golden token with mysterious writings that she carries in her hands. Young-ah recognizes the object on the spot and goes shocked upon seeing that it is the bronze token of the prestigious sword family. Gyeomju perceives the reaction and asks if she recognizes the item, causing Young-ah to question tense who she really is. The young servant falls silent, facing the criminal leader with an extremely serious and worried look at what that means. The blonde says that does not matter and asks if now she understands why she does not care about the consequences of her suspicions. Suddenly, a voice emerges at the window asking if he could take a close look at that golden object right there. Everyone in the room gets startled by the interruption, and Yoonga feels relieved upon recognizing her young master's presence there. Yoon So-yeon appears, smiling, leaping the window, commenting cheerfully that fortunately he did not arrive too late right behind. The guard with the scar climbs up tired and complains, asking why he leaped instead of using the main gate. The Proto responds laughing that he did that because it looks much cooler, leaving the guard quite indignant. So-hyun steps closer to Gyumju with his hand extended, asking to see the token, leaving the criminal leader totally without reaction. She stares at him perplexed and asks if he really expects her to simply deliver the valuable object into his hands. Gyumju's monk thug advances, irritated, and yells, wanting to know who on earth is the meddler who just invaded the conversation. So-hyun places his hand on his guard's shoulder and asks with derision if he cannot deduce just by looking at their clothes. The faction thug wonders upon noticing that he is a guard of the Sword Clan, but tries to disguise the fear, asking if they think they will back down because of that. The guard with the scar only crosses his arms in silence, showing extreme irritation with the insolent thug's petulance. Yan So-yeon alerts with a calm smile on his face for them to take care, because despite his simple garments, he is a formidable warrior. The thugs fall into laughter and mock him, saying that if that youth is indeed a master, they are the greatest warriors in all the world. Seeing that the conversation goes nowhere, the Proto sighs calmly and orders his guard to recover the medallion back. The guard with the scar accepts the order promptly, while his countenance darkens completely, revealing a frightening energy. With all the calm in the world, he takes the first step in direction of the adversary group that waits without understanding what is about to happen. Immediately, the criminals begin to sweat cold upon feeling an overwhelming pressure and a monstrous spiritual energy coming from the servant. The guard takes the second step, releasing a dark and imposing aura that leaves all the enemies there paralyzed with pure terror. Totally horrified, and without managing to move a single muscle of their bodies, the thugs begin to tremble uncontrollably from panic. When the dangerous warrior takes the third step, the tension in the meeting room reaches its maximum limit. Jumju widens her eyes in a complete state of shock upon perceiving the absurd level of strength of that mysterious man. In a blink of an eye, the guard passes buzzing by the villainess and snatches the bronze medallion from her hands with extreme ease and speed. He steps firm on the ground right after, concluding his swift and precise movement before everyone's startled eyes. The guard bows respectfully before Yeon So-hyun and alerts that he brought the medallion back as was ordered by his lord. With her hands still trembling because of the scare, the blonde leader realizes that that simple guard is actually a martial master. Yeon So-hyun takes the bronze object and decides to analyze it closely to check all the details carved on the ancient piece. The pavilion mistress asks if the item is really true, and the young master confirms, smiling, that the piece is in fact totally authentic. He explains that the medallion represents a promise of mutual and eternal help that the clan made to a benefactor in the past, costing even their own life. Listening to the detailed explanation, the pavilion mistress thinks to herself that that noble object was once a symbol of absolute trust. The heir tosses the item up in a casual way, commenting that nowadays it turned into just a bargaining chip to close business. Gyeomju takes the object back and agrees with a sarcastic smile, recalling that it still serves as a guarantee of protection against their clan. The Proto confirms with closed eyes and admits that if they ignore the symbol, all the credibility built by the Sword family will collapse for good. With a mocking smile, the villainess perceives whom she is dealing with and asks if he is the famous young heir known for not using a sword. Staring at her in an extremely serene manner, he confirms without hesitation his true identity as being Yeon So-hyun himself. Gyumju lets out a hysterical and mocking laugh, saying that for a brief instant she got scared, and that almost ruined her style. She asks what would bring someone who should live isolated like an immortal to a place like that, mocking that he got tired of ruining his own clan. The blonde continues her sharp provocations and questions if he now plans to walk around to drag the Sword family's name through the mud. Suddenly, a strong noise echoes through the room. When Yoonga's metal pipe is slammed with extreme force against the wooden table, Yoonga takes a step forward, visibly furious, and alerts in a threatening tone for Gyumju to take much care with what she speaks of her lord. The pavilion mistress also intervenes in the discussion, recalling that no matter what they say, he still makes part of the noble sword family. Gyumju cuts her speech laughing and questions if an useless young master who knows nothing of the world really looks like a warrior of that clan. She says the valuable connection she got does not compare to the clan's eldest son, since today she met with the second young master's ally. The villainess suddenly interrupts her own reasoning upon looking fixedly at Yunga, asking for everyone to wait a second. She stares at the young servant for a few moments with a thoughtful look, while the two sisters continue in absolute silence in the middle of the office. With a malicious smile, the villainess points her finger and says she noticed that Yunga is the problematic girl of whom the second young master spoke so much. Yunga only remains quiet while she faces the adversary with deep anger and discontent stamped on her tense countenance. Gyumju finds all that coincidence wonderful, commenting cheerfully that she just heard speak of her that same morning and now finds her there. She asks why on earth the servant refused the golden chance of being the second young master's concubine to flee with the swordless failure. She mocks asking what she expects to gain following a loafer, but Yunga reacts furious, demanding that the villainess do not insult her master. Yunga completes saying that someone insignificant like her does not have the slightest right to pronounce in such a vulgar way the name of someone so noble. Gyumju retorts laughing that he is in fact noble for giving up all his birthrights and duties while being criticized by his own family. She continues mocking that he is still more noble than a homeless person like her, leaving the young servant completely without words, and frustrated. The swordless man title was always a reason for joke in Luoyang, being seen by everyone as an ungrateful, cowardly, and runaway son without presence. Gyumju notices the girl's silence and provokes, saying that if she has any defense to present about her master, she is ready to listen. Yunga boils with anger in silence for knowing that So Hyun is nothing of that, but recognizes that trying to explain the truth now would be of no use. For the first time in life, she feels completely helpless and weak for not having her own strength to defend him from such cruel insults. However, a friendly hand gently touches the young woman's shoulder, while a calm and very familiar voice suddenly orders for her to stop. So-hyun emerges at her side, asking for the villainess to stop with that, warning Sirius that if she continues importuning his dear servant, he will get irritated. Gyumju turns her back, smiling, commenting that the joke lost its fun, and alerts that her original intention was only to leave a severe warning for them. The pavilion mistress faces the criminal with a look of deep hatred and extreme tension. Because of the threats, Gyumju displays a malicious smile and alerts that on the next time she returns, that useless young master will not be capable of saving her. The informant only grinds her teeth and whispers the rival's name in a tone of pure, repressed fury. The blonde leader waves mockingly while she withdraws from the pavilion, along with all her fearsome entourage. As soon as the criminals leave, Yunga begins to tremble violently, giving signs that she is feeling very unwell. The young woman collapses on her knees on the floor, and with her last forces asks for apologies to her young master before losing her senses. Desperate, the older sister runs to hold her before she falls for good, and yells by Yunga's name for her to wake up. The girl continues completely unconscious. With her breath wheezing and her face quite flushed with fever, Yunga is laid on a cozy bed while Yeon So-hyun and his personal guard observe her with much worry. The guard grinds his teeth, enraged with the audacity of those insects who dared to stain the sword family's prestigious name. He closes his fist with so much strength that it comes to tremble, lamenting that the young master does not have the political power he deserves for his status. The man apologizes and says that if So-hyun had real power, he would have taken the medallion and sliced all those insolent right there. The prota stares at him with calm and says he does not need to apologize for anything, because he fulfilled very well his guard role. He advises the servant to return to the clan now, because whoever gave the medallion to Gyumju might end up chasing the two together. The guard enters into despair and argues that his only and true duty is to continue protecting the young master. So-hyun retorts in a cold way, saying there is no reason for him to sacrifice himself for someone to whom he never swore loyalty with his sword. The man lowers his head deeply, sad with his master's harsh words, and apologizes formally. So-hyun extends his hand and delivers an official document to the guard, ordering him to take that paper immediately. He explains that it deals with an order declaring that his temporary escort mission was concluded and that he must return to the clan. The servant holds the envelope with much strength and with a tight heart responds that he understood the received orders. Walking back through the hallway, the guard grinds his teeth, frustrated for feeling so helpless and useless. Before that situation, Yoonga's sister enters the bedroom, asking if she is going to be okay, but So-hyun, measuring the servant's pulse, asks what she wants to say. The master recalls that she was already informed that the younger is only sleeping, but the sister continues quite apprehensive and suspicious. She questions the reason for him taking so much time to check the pulse of someone who supposedly is only tired. Letting go of the young woman's wrist, So-hyun changes subject and asks if she finally brought the information about the Black Bones faction. The mistress delivers the papers, but demands to know first the younger's real diagnosis, while the heir thinks she suffers from something serious. The informant enters into immediate panic and asks desperate what is the terrible ailment that is afflicting her younger sister. The young master explains calmly that extreme exhaustion is a serious condition, capable of taking lives before the person even notices. Irritated to see it was nothing serious, the mistress questions why he requested the secret reports about Luoyang's criminals. So-hyun flips through the documents and comments that, by the flow of collected data, she seems to be plotting something very dangerous against the faction. The woman responds in a sharp way, questioning what her personal plans have to do with the young heir's matters. He tells her to stop with that madness, but she retorts asserting that she is not a subordinate of his to have to follow his orders. He alerts that the medallion is real, and that she, working with information, should know very well the Sword Clan's true power. She explodes in anger, asking how someone who knows that could stay just watching everything, but he asks to converse outside. Night soon falls over the pavilion roofs, bathing all the outer courtyard with the cold and mysterious light of the full moon in the sky. From the outside, So-hyun breaks the silence and asks which is the most influential and powerful merchant guild in all the region. He compliments asking which is the largest martial arts family in the world, and the informant responds promptly that it is the Luoyang clan. She yells indignant about how the clan could ally with monsters like the criminal faction while Luoyang's people died of hunger. She rants that criminals of the worst kind continued sucking the blood of the innocent and multiplying without anyone doing anything. So-hyun completes saying in a dark way that the main family not only ignored all of this, but in truth is using the bandits furious. She yells, asking what he has been doing all this time if he already knew of all these horrible atrocities in the shadows. She confesses she found Gyumju's provocations coarse, but admits that the criminal was not even a bit wrong about his character. The informant says she knows he had talents in the past, but accuses him of just wasting his time using his exile as an excuse. She turns her back, irritated, and alerts for him not to meddle in her revenge plans. Since she is willing to risk her own life, the young master says in a cold way for her not to mess with Gyumju anymore, causing the informant to freeze in place immediately upon hearing the warning. With a solemn timing, So-hyun begins to tell the story of two sisters from the past who shared an extremely strong emotional bond. He reveals that the older sister had a strong sense of justice and could not forgive the criminals who destroyed the village where they lived. Because of that, she risked everything to fight alongside her companions, but the plan failed terribly, and all ended up dead. The master reveals that the talented younger sister went enraptured with pure hatred upon discovering about her dear older sister's tragic end. Consumed by madness and thirst for revenge, she hunted relentlessly and massacred all those who took her sister to the grave. The young master explains that the younger ended up hunted and ended as a public enemy, defining that story as a tale of the past and also of the future. Totally confused and scared by that mysterious revelation, the pavilion mistress asks of what exactly he is speaking. So-hyun laments that they did not manage to leave their names nor their noble intentions registered in a proper way in the world. He continues saying that in the invented stories, they turned into just traitors condemned and cursed by everyone in the martial world. The informant admits that by being foolish, she cannot understand the real meaning of the young master's enigmatic words. So-hyun questions if she intends to follow with her fair revenge until the end, even knowing that this will require terrible sacrifices. He asks coldly if she will continue, even if innocent people end up dying because of her choices and actions. The mistress widens her eyes horrified and guarantees convicted that something so terrible like that could never happen in her plans. The master alerts that changing. History's course requires much blood, but the good ones cannot bear seeing innocents being sacrificed for that. He explains that those heroes sacrificed only themselves, while he begins to place the frightening wooden mask on his face. The informant takes a step back, completely shocked upon recognizing right away that legendary and feared mystical artifact. So-hyun recalls that in his youth, he dreamed of changing the world, but perceived that this was only an impossible dream to come true. Since then, his only desire was to live a simple and peaceful life, finding joy in the small things of daily life. However, because of the social position in which he was born, having a quiet life and without worries became something totally impossible. He tried to abandon his greed to be free like the wind, but ended up failing to change the inevitable fate he received upon birth. With his eyes glowing through the mask, he asserts that the destiny of the two sisters still has not been totally decided in the world. The mistress backs away, frightened before the heir's overwhelming power, who promises to closely observe the future that awaits them. He alerts that he will observe if their destiny will cross or align with his, releasing an immense amount of dark energy. The Proto declares that his path is the underworld's demonic trail, where only a sea of blood and corpses reveals itself. So-hyun disappears in the darkness under the informant's astonished gaze, wishing that they do not need to meet on this trail of blood. Out of breath and sweating cold, the mistress questions herself in panic what just happened there, and what is the young master's true identity. Meanwhile, in the darkness of Luoyang's slums, the lack of humanity and compassion creates the perfect scenario to recruit new bandits. In one of the Black Bones faction branches, a bald brute waits patiently sitting under the full moon's clear light. The gangster plans his next steps to get a quick promotion, when a mysterious voice calls him from the middle of the darkness. The man gets startled by the sudden interruption and looks confused around. Trying to identify where that mysterious call came from, Yeon So-hyun emerges from the shadows using his frightening mask and calmly asks if that place is a branch of the criminal faction. The gangster turns irritated and tells the skinny youth to leave from there before he loses patience and uses brute force against him. The Proto only stares at him in an intimidating way from behind the artifact and responds that he is not there to ask for a job from anyone. The brute smiles mockingly and proposes a quick test, challenging the masked youth to survive just 2 strikes from his fists. He promises that he will give a special recommendation letter for him to enter the criminal group if he manages to resist his attacks. So-hyun mocks the opponent's slowness of reasoning and coldly repeats that he already alerted he has no interest at all in joining them, completely furious with the intruder's derision. The brute advances, dealing a violent punch, and asks what he wants after all. With extreme agility and without suffering any scratch, the heir dodges the direct attack and emerges right behind the attacker in an instant. So-hyun alerts that since he is only the gatekeeper of the location, he will do the kindness of explaining in detail what his objective is there. The Proto grabs the bald man's head with violent strength and calmly reveals that he went up to there only to devour all of them. Dark hands and claws made of pure black energy begin to emerge from the floor, enveloping the gangster who yells desperate in pain. The young master lifts the enemy in the air with his dark technique and asks in a sadistic tone if they can finally begin that grand feast. The brute tries to free himself desperately while he is consumed by the black mist, asking what he means by that with a sinister purple glow in the eye. So-hyun commands his shadows to crush the adversary and loudly demands that he begin to sing. He hurls the opponent against the floor with a brutal force, releasing waves of destructive energy that shake all the outer courtyard. He teaches that the essential part of singing is knowing how to breathe well. While the bandit yells out of pure agony upon having his chest pressured, So-hyun ironizes, saying he mastered well the first step and promises that he will break every bone of his body into 3 pieces. The heir lets out a demonic laugh from behind the frightening artifact and announces in a dark tone that he is ready for the next step. He manipulates his dark claws to launch the brute high up in the air under that violent night sky of combat. The gangster lets out a last bellow of despair, upon being struck squarely and impaled by multiple spikes made of pure black energy. The Proto observes the defeated body fall lifeless on the floor and mocks, saying it is a pity that he did not live to learn more. He lets out an extremely dark and cold laugh that echoes through all the silent courtyard of the criminal faction branch. The demonic energy spreads, causing the young master to question himself if the incomplete pair of the mystical artifact finally awakened. Hearing the terrible confusion from the outside, dozens of armed thugs run desperate in direction of the property courtyard. The thugs come across the frightening scene and yell, horrified, asking who on earth is the masked monster before them. The Proto greets everyone peacefully from behind his frightening mask, while emanating a terrible purple aura. One of the criminal's leaders backs away startled and yells, wanting to know who on earth is the masked intruder. He questions, furious, how the stranger dares cause such a confusion right in the middle of a branch of their sect. So-hyun responds calmly that they do not need to know who he is, inviting everyone to enjoy the feast together. Calling the intruder crazy, the thugs advance with everything, but the Proto dodges easily from their strikes. One of the bandits leaps, raising a huge iron sword, and roars, saying the youth is pleading to die. However, So-hyun blocks the heavy attack in an implacable way and without showing any difficulty. In a blink of an eye, he advances and grabs with brutal strength the face of one of the opponents in the darkness. The impact gushes a large amount of blood through the air, while the intruder deals a lethal counterattack. The opponent's body is thrown against the floor without any mercy, startling the thugs who watch everything. The leader bellows, enraged, ordering them to end the intruder quickly, causing the rest of the group to advance at once. The men yell in anger, while the young master thinks to himself that a feast is not complete without a dance. He displays a sadistic smile from behind the artifact and tells the adversaries to fight with all their forces to survive. A devastating explosion of Shadow's energy breaks out from the heir's body, swallowing everyone around. The criminals yell in agony upon being struck squarely and pierced by sharp stakes created by the darkness. Laughing loud, he comments that that place really is the perfect party hall, full of music, dance, and food. More thugs cough blood and yell, desperate upon being brutally impaled by the master's lethal shadows. The force of darkness throws the injured bandits through the air in a devastating way, destroying completely their resistance. A stack of defeated and bloodied bodies collapses at once against the courtyard floor under the moonlight. The heir remains standing calmly in the center of the location, surrounded by a dense and frightening purple smoke. He looks around and questions himself if the confrontation already ended in such a swift way, and without any difficulty, the young master laments their weakness, commenting that he was only beginning to enter the combat rhythm. He grabs the injured leader by the collar, warning in a dark tone that he will need to devour him to satiate his hunger. The bandit claims desperately for his life, while the young master decides which part of his body he will use to satisfy himself. Laughing in a frightening way, he stares at the victim with his glowing eyes from behind the enigmatic mask and smiles. Suddenly, a powerful and swift cut of luminous energy is dealt in direction of the Prota from behind. Perceiving the imminent danger, the heir stops his movement at the same instant to track the attack origin. He leaps back in an extremely agile manner, dodging by little from the sharp strike that passes scraping. A strong warrior wields his sword, calling the intruder a monster, and alerts that he will be his opponent from that moment onward. The Prota calls him a simple puppet, while the swordsman advances, dealing multiple and furious consecutive strikes. So-hyun blocks the onslaughts at high speed, creating shiny sparks of light at each force collision. He rests his feet firmly on the ground to stabilize his body after detaining the heavy sequence of physical attacks. The two face each other seriously in the destroyed courtyard, maintaining a safe distance to plan the next movement. The young master comments mockingly that finally appeared a martial artist who really knows how to fight for real. The adversary assumes a firm combat stance under the moonlight, ready to give all of himself against the mysterious masked one, grinding his teeth in anger. The swordsman curses the Prota a monster and raises his long blade with both hands. He steps firm and advances at high speed, leaving a trail of dust and destruction by the courtyard path. Releasing a roaring war cry, the warrior leaps to strike the opponent from top to bottom with fury. He activates his special cut technique, launching a massive blast of bluish energy in So-hyun's direction. The Prota uses his defensive skills to bar the swift attacks, generating constant explosions of light. Letting out a sadistic laugh, he releases his darkness flames to overtop for good the adversary's technique. He breaks the swordsman's defense and asks with disdain if that pathetic level of strength is all he has to offer. Sweating cold and perceiving the huge disparity of spiritual power between the two, the man rants, desperate. Without giving time for reaction, the heir prepares his dark claws to deal the mercy strike on the adversary. He executes a crushing blow that tears the swordsman's chest apart with an overwhelming physical violence. The warrior spits much blood and lets out a cry of pure pain before losing consciousness due to the lethal impact. The warrior's body falls lifeless in the middle of the dust, making a dull noise against the branch's destroyed floor. The master only turns his back slowly, observing with total coldness the damages caused by his unmeasurable strength. He laments from behind the enigmatic mask that the combat ended so fast, right when he began to amuse himself. The scene ends showing the faction's mysterious and secret underground chamber, with stone stairs that go down to the darkness. The Prota descends calmly the dark stone steps that lead up to the interior of the mysterious secret chamber. One of the location watchmen perceives his presence and draws his weapon to attack the intruder immediately. The man advances, yelling how he dares enter there, and tells the masked one to die while dealing a swift strike. So-hyun dodges quickly and returns the attack with his devastating purple aura, cutting the opponent with ease. The watchman is hurled back with violence and falls unconscious upon the damp floor of that dark dungeon. Without any hurry, the young master continues walking more to the back of the faction's tenebrous hideout. Upon entering the main room, he comes across a horrible scene of chained prisoners hung by the ceiling, analyzing the atrocities around him. The Prota questions himself, intrigued, what type of macabre place is that one right there? One of the chained survivors enters into complete panic upon seeing the dark figure and pleads for him not to approach. Ignoring the appeals, So-hyun takes one more firm step ahead in direction of one of the torturers who is on the floor. The injured executioner yells desperately from terror, pleading for his life upon seeing the youth's implacable approach. He bellows in agony when the Prota crushes his leg, while the heir thinks that place looks like a slaughterhouse. So-hyun reflects horrified about the terrible cruelties committed inside there, concluding in silence that this world is truly insane. The executioner accuses him of being a monster, but the young master retorts asking if the atrocities they commit there are normal. The man laughs mockingly while he is held by the hair and yells without any shame that that is just their business. He yells out of control, saying they do all that just to earn a living under the prota's close and gelid gaze. Without giving ears to the cynical excuses, the youth releases his dark energy against the thug's face in an implacable way. The executioner lets out a last cry of pure pain before being knocked out with a brutal blow and thrown against the wall. So-hyun concludes the punishment, dealing one more crushing blow on the criminal's head, finishing for good with the confrontation. He thinks about people's hypocrisy, who call his justice madness while nicknaming the sale of lives business. The prota gently comforts a young rescued victim, wondering if he is the crazy one or if the world is upside down. Meanwhile, the scene changes to Gyumju's luxurious weekly refuge, a massive and sumptuous property under the night sky. The villainess relaxes peacefully in a luxurious hot spring bathtub decorated with red rose petals. While resting in the water, she begins to reflect thoughtfully about the heir known as the Swordless Man. She recalls the information she received in the morning, perceiving that heir's plans were completely unknown. The blonde questions herself if no one truly knew what the youth intended to do since the start of his mysterious actions. She notices that the youth she met personally today did not look at all like the useless rumors. Acting with extreme confidence, Gyumju ponders if So-hyun would be hiding some much larger secret, since he maintained himself calm, even surrounded by armed men. She decides to brush away those thoughts, thinking it is nonsense, and complains out loud to her butler that the bathwater is cold. The head butler responds promptly and in a very submissive way, swallowing dry before his boss's demand tone. He alerts that he will resolve the problem immediately, while the villainess waits patiently in the massive marble bathtub. The butler passes the order, shouting to the sect servants, telling them to heat up the leader's bathwater right now. Gigantic thugs bring captured prisoners who plead for mercy but receive sharp orders to shut their mouths. Gyumju analyzes coldly the hostages and comments with disdain that the recent merchandise does not look to be as fresh as the previous ones. The villainess guarantees she will make her men choose better the next victims, while the poor hostage cries out of pure terror. She coldly orders the start of the bizarre sacrifice procedure, ignoring the prisoner's desperate help requests. One of the executioners raises a sharp and heavy metallic sword above the helpless victim's head, who yells in panic. The hostage lets out a last and agonizing cry of pain, while the lethal blow is dealt without any hesitation in the location. The victim's blood gushes in abundance directly inside the bathtub, dyeing all the warm water with a dark red tone. Gyumju gathers the reddish liquid in the palm of her hand, and comments relieved that she was worried about the emergence of new wrinkles. The villainess bathes her face peacefully with the victim's fresh blood, using it in a macabre way as a beauty treatment. She lets out a sadistic and insane laugh upon delighting in the bizarre bath, showing all her boundless cruelty. Suddenly, a messenger enters running and reports that one of her main bases was attacked and totally destroyed. Already dressed with her elegant red cloak before the mirror, Gyumju turns startled and yells without believing what she heard. With an extremely furious and intimidating look, she demands to know immediately who was responsible for such an audacity. The servant explains, trembling, that they do not know the details, because all the men lost their wits and fell too fast. Gyumju rants, irritated, saying the surviving victims must have mentioned some clue before passing. The lackey reports, startled, that the few survivors spoke about the appearance of an evil spirit, a violent monster. The leader repeats, confused, the term said, and the servant confirms, explaining that some survivors spoke about a white mask. Gyumju grinds her teeth, furious, and with a killing look, repeating, shocked, the information about the mysterious white mask found. The servant explains that the men fell in such a swift way that it was totally impossible to get a detailed report with a coherent story. Gyumju supposes seriously that her thugs must have gotten into a mess with some extremely powerful martial master. The assessor recalls that in the past year, one of his subordinates ended up provoking a master, and an entire branch of theirs was completely annihilated. Few people are born with the rare talent of manipulating spiritual energy, and those who become true martial artists are even rarer. He adds that among these warriors, the few who manage to break the barrier and reach the supreme master level are an absolute minority. Gyumju comments that doing business in this area makes her perceive that although these masters are rare, they seem to bump into them frequently. The villainess tells them to alert the men not to cause trouble for now, believing that if they stay quiet, the intruder soon will tire and leave. She wonders what type of idiot would be acting like a hero, and mocks, saying that one should not raise youths with these silly ideas in their heads. The blonde completes saying that it is necessary to learn to live in a flexible way and adapt to the real-world rules to truly survive. The bodyguard reflects thoughtfully about the rumor of the starved ghost that supposedly attacked their secret bases recently. Gumju perceives his hesitation and asks if he heard speak of anything, leaving the warrior visibly tense and awkward. The bodyguard asks the boss if the mercenaries they sent to the gambling house a few days ago had not vanished. The assessor confirms that they vanished out of nowhere, but says that since outsourced thugs vanish all the time, they resolve to ignore the case. The warrior agrees that this is very common to happen, but shows to be quite worried about the details behind this. Gumju loses patience for good and yells furious, demanding that he stop stalling and say right away what he is hiding with that hesitation. Nervous, he explains that he usually frequents that gambling house and ended up remembering a bizarre rumor he heard from the clients there. He reveals that according to local rumors, many people affirm to have seen a terrible starved ghost roaming the surroundings on that night. The man admits he does not usually believe in urban legends, but confesses that the huge amount of similar reports left him intrigued. Gyumju gets irritated and asks what this has to do with their matter, telling the warrior to stop repeating nonsense from startled peasants. The boss rebukes the subordinates, saying that as business people, they should focus on much more productive and logical conversations. However, she stays thoughtful for an instant and begins to sweat cold upon considering an extremely frightening possibility in her mind. She wonders if there would exist another mysterious being like her old master, who taught her bizarre martial arts of totally unknown origin. Suddenly, another guard invades the hall desperate and yells that the situation got terrible from 1 hour to the next for their faction. The messenger reports out of breath that one more secret branch of their organization was just completely destroyed by the mysterious intruder. Gumju asks apprehensive if the attack was again performed by the accursed fellow of the white mask, and the guard confirms the information, placing her hand on her face, tired. The villainess unburdened, saying she already expected to lose a few more hideouts until that man calmed down. She concludes that by the speed with which her posts are falling, even with armed guards, the culprit can only be a top-level master. That being so, she decides it is better to ignore the situation for now, since any lost thugs can be easily replaced. The butler agrees seriously, recalling that hiring top-level mercenary warriors or experienced ronin would be too expensive for the group. Tired of the stressful conversation, Gyumju tells everyone to leave from her sight and orders that they prepare a masseuse to help her relax. The head butler makes a respectful bow and alerts that he will look after everything immediately, withdrawing from the main hall in a hurry. Moments later, the grand doors are opened abruptly by another servant who yells desperate that they are facing major problems. Gyumju turns quickly with a countenance of pure fury and apprehension, fearing that one more post of her faction has been attacked. On the next morning in Luoyang, the first sun rays begin to illuminate the imposing and beautiful traditional temples of the grand city through the bustling commercial streets. Residents begin to gossip, whispering that 5 secret bases of the bandits fell in a single night. Another citizen corrects the rumor immediately, affirming to have heard from reliable sources that in truth there were 7 locations attacked and destroyed. A third man enters the discussion, saying he heard speak of 10 hideouts, while a woman affirms that in truth there were 15 people comment horrified that no body was left behind in the destroyed locations, and that not even a single drop of blood remained. The rumors run loose that the amount of missing without leaving a trace is gigantic, making everyone wonder who did that. In the sumptuous palace of the Luoyang sword family, an imposing patriarch complains about being bothered early with such banal matters. Before all the guards lined up in the grand noble hall, Gyumju introduces herself before the leader, questioning his lack of information. Sitting on his luxurious throne, the patriarch stares at the blonde with disdain and asks irritated when it was that he said he had no information. He faces her with deep seriousness and questions in an intimidating way, if she is implying that the powerful sword family lacks data. Gyumju gulps and trembles from fear with the leader's imposing reaction, perceiving that she ended up crossing the permitted limits there. She immediately bows in a deep reverence, asking for humble apologies for her bold conduct before the clan's authority. The patriarch continues rebaking the villainess in a cold way, affirming that she clearly does not know her due place and is under a foolish illusion. He asks severely if she really thinks she received the bronze medallion only because of the political influence that her father possessed. Ashamed and frightened under the leader's absurd pressure, the blonde guarantees with her head bowed that she would never think of something so disrespectful like that. The patriarch observes patiently a large sand hourglass on his office desk, while the tension continues hovering in the hall. He complains coldly that he already wasted almost 15 minutes of his precious work time because of a conversation so useless like that one. The patriarch points furious at Gyumju and coldly orders that she vanish from his sight at that exact moment. Quite humiliated and frightened, the blonde executes a new deep and silent reverence before the leader aware of her mistake. She walks at slow steps out of the luxurious hall, carrying a countenance of pure frustration and contained hatred. The patriarch opens the document and launches one last terrible threat, affirming that if she disappoints him one more single time, there will be consequences. Hearing the harsh warning words, Geumju hesitates and freezes in place in a tense way, without courage to look directly back. The clan leader completes coldly saying that he will pass the sword family's bronze medallion to another person if she fails again. The villainess widens her eyes in complete shock and panic, with the real threat of losing her only and valuable protection symbol. At the property of the clan's astronomer, a sharp voice echoes from the outside telling someone to wake up already, since the sun is already high. However, the astronomer continues sleeping deeply, snoring loud over a stack of books scattered across his work desk. Seeing that he has no other alternative to make him wake up, the servant approaches sighing and decides to act in a much more drastic way there. He shakes the astronomer, abruptly yelling that it is an emergency, causing the man to wake up startled and without understanding anything of what happened. The servant asks for him to calm down and reports that he saw something very strange in the sky on the previous night while performing his watch shift alone. With an extremely serious and worried countenance, the youth affirms convictedly that it deals with a terrible bad omen sign. The astronomer takes a sip of tea peacefully and minimizes the situation, commenting that bad omen signs are common things to happen. However, the servant insists with urgency that it is not just any sign, but rather a warning of a catastrophe of gigantic proportions. He reveals in a dramatic way that he believes to have observed the legendary and frightening heavenly Death Star glowing intensely in the sky. The astronomer spits the tea and asks, startled, if the servant is sure to have spotted the feared and mystical bad omen star. Since ancient times, the legendary heavenly Death Star was always feared for bringing along countless tragedies and violent massacres. The astronomer sits visibly perturbed with his servant's report, muttering that, if that is true, they are before a very grave problem. The youth suggests apprehensive that they should report immediately this frightening discovery to the clan's superior authorities. The master laughs at the idea and questions who would believe in a prediction about the Death Star in nowadays, thinking they would be ridiculed. The youth suggests, then, that they at least report the occurrence in an official way to the supervision official responsible for their organization. Meanwhile, in another part of Luoyang, a blind elderly man makes enigmatic revelations surrounded by a group of quite anxious and attentive people. Yan So-hyun walks peacefully through the commercial streets, oblivious to the fact of being considered by everyone the man with less authority in the clan. In the dead of night, the scene returns to the silent surroundings of the commercial pavilion, where the moon's light illuminates the city's deserted alleys. A group of curious residents gathers anxiously around an elderly master fortune teller, asking if he manages to predict anything new today. One of the men rebukes the others, telling them to stop rushing him, recalling that the old fortune teller is concentrated in his deep thoughts. The old master with gray hair and blindfolded eyes remains in absolute silence for a few seconds before beginning to speak. He reports trembling that he can no longer see the sun and that the sky was completely swallowed by an endless darkness that devoured all light. Suddenly, the old fortune teller is struck by a terrible mystical premonition that leaves him in a complete state of shock and absolute panic. He exclaims, desperate, asking, "What is that?" while a vision of legs covered in dark energy emerges before his blind eyes. The elder points his arms to the sky, yelling, terrified, that the sovereign of the dark sky finally awakened and returned to our world. He questions if the demonic scripture awakened, and if the ancient entity that makes the heavens tremble from terror finally returned to punish us. The old man yells that the sovereign of darkness descended to castigate all sinners and heartless from the deepest darkness of the underworld. He claims in ecstasy for the unprovided and starved to get joyful, because the divine justice of the shadows finally arrived to save them. The fortune teller dances in a trance, proclaiming that black lightning bolts will fall from the indifferent heavens to announce the triumphant arrival of the venerable of darkness. The men around observe the scene skeptical, whispering that the old man's words are absurd and that he must have finally gone senile for good. Ignoring the laughs, the elder runs, speeding through the darkness, laughing loud and celebrating that the true sovereign finally arrived to govern. The legend says that if you meet the white masked demon, you must bow and confess your sins, because he is the implacable executor of darkness. On the next day, the news that the feared Black Bones faction was led to the brink of destruction in just 2 days spread swift through the city. In the pavilion office, the mistress analyzes the data and concludes that the main clue involves the white masked demon and the sovereign of darkness. She reflects in silence that the masked warrior whom she spotted personally on that day also utilized the same mystical artifact on the face. The informant turns in direction of her faithful personal bodyguard Gyu and asks what she thinks about all that mysterious danger situation. Gyu approaches with her arms behind her back and asks in a calm and casual way about which subject exactly she would like to discuss there. The mistress specifies that it deals with the clan's first young master, recalling that she had told them to watch him whenever they met in the city. Gyu refers to him by his pejorative nickname of Swordless Man, causing the boss to irritably rebuke her and demand that she do not use that term. The bodyguard asks for apologies and explains thoughtfully that personally she found the youth quite different from all the bad rumors spread. The pavilion mistress stares at her seriously and firmly, alerts her not to go out there, revealing that she works for their information agency. Gyu compliments, saying she found the young heir extremely generous and with a notably brilliant and open mind during the encounter. The bodyguard reveals that she tried to intimidate him secretly using her killing aura, but the heir did not sketch absolutely any reaction. The pavilion mistress stays thoughtful with Gyu's report and wonders if that is indeed true. Suddenly, a yell echoes in the pavilion, with the mistress furious, demanding to know what Gyu has been doing for real. Shortly after, the mistress goes to the pavilion kitchen to converse directly with her younger sister, Yonga. Upon seeing her sister enter, Yonga turns holding a pot and asks if she is referring to her young master. The mistress feigns disinterest and says she only wanted to know better what type of person is the boss her sister attends to. Without giving much weight to the question, Yonga continues chopping the food and says she does not have much to speak of. The mistress finds that strange and recalls that on the last time the younger almost attacked her just to defend the young master. She then asks if her sister is feeling better, and Yonga responds with a smile that yes. Thanks to him, Yonga advises that if her sister is really curious about the youth, the best to do is ask him personally. The scene changes to a teapot serving a very hot tea directly into a ceramic cup. In the hall, Yeon So-yeon asks with calm for them not to keep releasing killing intent, because that would ruin the tea. Gyu says there is nothing to worry about since the mission ended, leaving the mistress totally surprised with that revelation. With a friendly smile on his face, So-hyun offers the warm tea and suggests that they drink it soon before it cools down. Nervous, the mistress thanks him, but comments that he did not need to serve personally as simple bodyguard. Gyu accepts the cup peacefully and thanks the young master, leaving her boss shocked with so much intimacy. The bodyguard praises the tea's wonderful aroma, while the mistress wonders if she is being serious about that. The heir smiles in a modest way and says she is only praising him too much with those words. Gyu insists she is not one to make empty praises and that she is being sincere in her opinion about the drink. So-hyun finds amusement and says she is fun. Offering a job for her case, she decides to change winds someday. Gyu jokes that she will look for him if she loses her job, which should happen soon by her boss's angry look. Before the bodyguard's casual joke, the young master cannot hold it and begins to laugh loud at all the situation. The mistress observes thoughtful and finds it strange how Gyu, who usually is so demanding with people, acts in such a relaxed way after the laughs. So-hyun resumes a calmer expression and focuses his attention on the main conversation. He then asks what would bring someone so busy to make a visit to a lazy fellow like him. The mood in the room changes completely when the mistress takes the floor to speak in a serious way with the young master, without small talks. She faces him fixedly and asks straight if he is the highly feared Venerable Dastrevas. So-hyun takes a sip of his tea with tranquility and asks what on earth would be this such Venerable Dastrevas. She explains that according to the survivors who escaped the Black Bones faction, their savior had specific characteristics. The mistress details that the man wore simple white clothes and a white mask, looking like an ordinary scholar with a light smile. So-hyun comments that by this description, the mysterious figure seems to be someone who does charity. She does not convince herself and points out that he also possesses exactly those same white clothes and the mask in his belongings. Smirking, the young master asks in a mocking tone if she is planning to search his things to check the proof. Frustrated, she asks why he insists on hiding this and what those enigmatic words from the past meant. So-hyun maintains the serene look while he savors the tea, seeming to measure each word before giving the final response. His tone changes to something extremely serious when he asks if she is truly prepared for the truth. Without hesitating for a single second, the mistress affirms with absolute determination that she is totally prepared for whatever comes. He insists on the questioning and asks if she is ready to carry the weight of the loss of countless innocents on the path. She confesses that since that day, she did not stop thinking about his words, reflecting deeply about the meaning of everything. The mistress recalls the mention of spilling enough blood to completely alter the course of all the empire's history. Squeezing her fist with strength, she says that if the sacrifice of innocent people is the necessary price for this historical change, she creates courage and asks openly if the young master is in truth planning to start a grand dynastic revolution. So-hyun only repeats the phrase with a half-smile, finding amusement in the woman's boldness of the question before him. He cites that according to Mencius, whoever damages benevolence is a thief, and whoever attempts against justice is nothing but a tyrant. He compliments saying that a heartless and cruel tyrant is no better than an ordinary peasant at the end of the day. The heir explains that although he knows King Wu ended the peasant Zhou, he never heard speak that he assassinated a legitimate king. The mistress listens attentive and asks if the path to which he referred previously in truth has direct relation to this. She imagines a terrible scenario with mountains of bodies and oceans of blood spreading through a demonic realm without compassion. Before that frightening vision of the dark path, she questions herself if something so drastic would be even viable in nowadays. She admits that responding to this flees from her capacity and believes that even the most brilliant minds would give the same response. So-hyun reflects that the difference between rich and poor was never so extreme and finds it bizarre how the world still maintains itself stable. So-hyun says to the mistress that the idea of starting a revolution in an era like this comes to be a complete absurdity. The pavilion mistress listens to him with attention and asks directly what would be, then, the true path that he intends to follow. He reveals that he spent much time thinking about this and questions if the blood necessary to change history really needs to be from ordinary people. So-hyun questions if the spilled blood needs to be from those who barely manage to survive and who only rise to die in name of a grand cause. With a dark smile and a frightening look, he suggests the alternative of simply eliminating the bad men instead of innocent people. The pavilion mistress is left completely in shock upon hearing that bizarre proposal and asks, incredulous, what he wants to say with that. He insists on the idea and asks what would happen if the blood of wicked men ran in the same amount that of innocents would be spilled. She tries to maintain calm and asks if that is only a bad taste joke, hoping that he is not speaking seriously about innocents dying. So-hyun stands up with tranquility and clarifies that everything he said is nothing but a simple hypothesis created by him. He begins to move away slowly through the room, saying from his back that he only wanted to reflect a bit more about this possibility. The mistress finds his thought incredibly childish and wonders how he would manage to easily differentiate who is good and who is bad. She argues that even if it were possible, there would be no clear pattern, since concepts like law and morals change according to situations. She completes saying that judging and ending the bad is impossible because no one has power to eliminate so many people to the point of changing history's course. To her, judging and punishing criminals out of mere whim would be the attitude of a raving lunatic, resulting in an even greater evil for the world. Suddenly, a frightening perception passes through the mistress's mind, leaving her paralyzed with terror at the shocking conclusion she just had. She recalls the ancient legend about the implacable grim reaper of the white mask, known for being the grand sovereign and the executor of divine punishment. It deals with the feared entity that punishes sinners with black lightning bolts in name of the indifferent heavens, acting in a cold way in the middle of the shadows, completely trembling and sweating from terror. The mistress finally pronounces out loud the feared name of that legend, the Venerable Das Trevis. So-hyun opens an enigmatic smile and comments that he does not know who invented this code name of Venerable Das Trevis, but thinks it is a great title. The mistress tries to recompose herself before that impactful revelation about the childish hypothesis that the young master had presented before smiling. So-hyun admits that he is very curious to see if this dark hero's actions can have success and if his plan really will work. The mistress questions herself if this path of punishing the strong to save the weak would not be something that only a demon without humanity would manage to tread. She faces the youth with an extremely serious expression, feeling the enormous weight of that dark conversation they just had. She then stands up and thanks for the young master's words, alerting that she needs to withdraw immediately to resolve other matters. So-hyun only wishes a good work to her while he observes the mistress and her faithful bodyguard leave the hall in a hurry. Already from the outside, the mistress comments with Gyu that now only the main base of the Black Bones faction remains to be totally eliminated. She reveals her plan of going to this main base still today. Accompanied by a small group of elite warriors and some collaborators, So-hyun had alerted her that this would be dangerous due to the bronze medallion that Gumju possesses, because the Sword family would have no mercy. She clarifies that they are not going to directly invade the criminal faction base, because there already exists another person in charge of doing this dirty work. However, the mistress makes clear that they are not going to stay still, and that their main objective is to prevent any member of the faction from managing to escape from there. She affirms with conviction that if the Sword family decides to create any problem only because of this interference of theirs in the enemy's flight, they simply are going to fight ahead against them, since they only would need to deal with the specific individual who delivered the medallion to Gyumju. With a determined look, the mistress walks alongside Gyu, affirming that they possess enough determination to face this great risk. So-yeon murmurs some words in silence while the room door closes completely, leaving him alone in his thoughts. He positions himself near the exit, observing thoughtfully through the pavilion window while the day begins to say goodbye silently. Suddenly, the scene is cut by the swift and brutal movement of a sharp blade, tearing the air with implacable violence. At the enemy base, one of the executioners coldly beheads a man, alerting everyone about the destiny of whoever dares try to flee the Black Bones faction. The victim's head rolls across the bloodied floor, stopping right before the feet of the other startled members of the criminal organization. With his sword bathed in blood, the furious executioner rants, calling all those who tried to escape cowards without honor. He yells with all the strength of his lungs that the swift punishment against the traitors makes part of a direct order from Lady Gyumju. The executioner raises the bloodied sword high up and orders all the warriors present there to prepare to have an honorable end. Meanwhile, the scene shows the outside of the grand traditional building that serves as Gyumju's secret hideout. In her private room, Gyumju questions her subordinate of trust about the possibility of her father also having refused her help request. The man lowers his head with respect and confirms in a quite tense way that her father really refused to send any aid. Gyumju reflects, irritated that he would never send his best warriors without knowing the true strength of the mysterious enemy they face. She grinds her teeth with hatred, knowing very well that their relation is purely for show and devoid of any real family affection. Squeezing her fist with extreme strength, she remembers with bitterness that Gyumjil's adopted daughters are treated only like disposable pieces. The servant alerts that Gyumjil told them to deliver an important message to her, causing the villainess to demand impatient that he tell everything very fast. The man hesitates for an instant and begins to explain the message, leaving Gyumju visibly worried about what she is about to listen to. Upon hearing the shocking revelation coming from her adopted father, Gyumju's eyes glow with pure fury, and she yells from hatred without managing to believe it. Gyumju gives an ear-splitting yell of pure fury and begins to violently break everything she sees ahead in her own room, breathing in an out-of-breath way. She tries to contain the insane anger while grinding her teeth at her father's refusal of help. She turns to her subordinate and asks coldly how many slaves they still have maintained at the faction's main base. Stammering from fear, the thug explains that there are not many slaves in the location because they barely perform commercial transactions there. Gyumju laments having to resort to the terrible secret art that her monstrous master taught her, something she wanted to avoid at all costs. She then orders that they gather immediately all the slaves and useless people who do not know how to fight in the hideout's basement. With a maniacal and bloodthirsty expression, she reveals that she will make the terrible dark ritual that her master taught her in the past. From the outside, a crow flies over silently the city roofs under the reddish sky of dusk. In one of the alleys, a group of masked agents of the pavilion waits in absolute silence, maintaining themselves on maximum alert to act. They hold firmly their weapons, prepared for any sign of hostile movement coming from the enemy base surroundings. While the crow continues its flight through the sky, the spies continue observing everything from the shadows of the alleys below. One of the masked warriors remains crouched over the roof, watching intently each corner of the region. He makes a discreet sign of the head to another companion, confirming that the area is clean and ready for the advance. One of the spies reports to the commander that the 15th unit already is properly positioned and ready for the attack. The commander of severe expression orders that they confirm the exact location of that unit in the designated posts. Without losing time, one of the masked spies leaps with incredible agility to initiate the infiltration. Right after, several pavilion warriors begin to run and leap silently across the city roofs. With extremely light and precise steps, they position themselves strategically around the enemy hideout. One of the men kneels before the pavilion mistress and reports that all the civilians of that area already were evacuated in safety. He adds that all the spies and allies already are in their combat positions and only await her signal. With a light smile of determination, the mistress orders everyone to maintain the original positions and stay vigilant. She alerts that as soon as the battle begins, everyone must follow strictly the protocol, and her subordinates confirm promptly. The imposing base of the Black Bones faction rises under the orange-tinted sky, surrounded by a calm that is about to end. From the top of the balcony, the pavilion mistress breaks the silence upon asking if her faithful companion is nervous with the invasion. Gyu, now using a black mask over her face, remains standing at her boss's side awaiting the orders. The mistress confesses she is not exactly nervous, but rather quite divided internally about the choices she has to make. She asks if the bodyguard heard all the serious conversation she had with So-yeon, but Gyu denies feigning not knowing anything. Gyu asks to be left out of dangerous revolution matters, but the boss insists for her to stop feigning she is silly. The boss insists and asks what is Gyu's sincere opinion in relation to the clan's first young master. Gyu reflects that even knowing he is the Venerable das Trevas, she still considers him a good man, although extremely terrifying. She explains she does not have a very rational reason for that. Being only a very strong intuition she feels in her chest, Gyu shows her total loyalty, affirming that no matter where the mistress decides to go, she will accompany her until the path's end. Touched by her friend's sincere words, the pavilion mistress smiles lightly and advises that she just follow her own heart. Gyu agrees calmly, while her boss places her hand on her shoulder as a sign of mutual support and deep trust. With decided hearts, the two women walk side by side in direction of the imminent battlefield. The mistress recalls the heir's words about eliminating the bad to change the world, thinking that that in fact sounds like madness. Even finding all that a boundless madness, she suddenly interrupts her steps upon pondering better about the subject. She looks slightly back with a thoughtful expression on her face, changing opinion about the young heir's capacity. She thinks that treating itself of the first young master and the Venerable das Trevas himself, perhaps he really is capable of achieving this. Meanwhile, the focus returns to the main base of the Black Bones faction, where the tension mood is larger each time. A gigantic and muscular bald bandit full of skull tattoos appears extremely irritated in the location. The brute rants furious. Cursing in a decentralized way, the enemies who dared invade their territory, he yells irritated upon seeing the masked spies and complains that now anyone thinks they have authority to attack them. The giant turns enraged to his own thugs and demands to know what those idiots are still doing standing there. Without any hesitation, the brute orders an immediate attack and the bandits run in a pack wielding their combat weapons. One of the pavilion's masked spies draws his blade with extreme swiftness, releasing a war cry upon advancing against the pack. With a single and lethal movement of his sharp sword, the warrior makes a clean and precise cut on the first opponent ahead. Blood splatters to all sides, leaving the other thugs totally paralyzed from fear upon seeing the attack efficiency. The eyes of one of the thugs widen in desperate absolute upon perceiving the enemy's absurd speed and the strength of his strikes. Another spy advances and strikes with strength the chest of one more adversary, clearing path with mastery in the middle of the bloody battle. One of the pavilion spies lands a precise dagger strike right in the chest of one of the faction's tattooed criminals. The battle spreads through the courtyard with several thugs being defeated and yelling desperately for mercy. Even the bald brute who led the pack is surprised by a swift attack and ends up being struck scraping. Perceiving that the combat is difficult, the giant orders his men to stay leaned on the walls to open space for those from behind. The thugs obey promptly, and the masked spies perceive a new wave of enemies approaching quickly. A new horde of bandits armed with spears emerges in a threatening way to reinforce the combat against the intruders. One of the spies alerts startled about the spear's barrier and urgently calls for the pavilion mistress to alert her. The mistress notices that they brought spearmen and that they seem to have withdrawn even the guards who protected their main base. She then orders the dispatch of all available reserves, allowing the field commanders to act according to their own judgments. The mistress observes thoughtfully the fact of the enemies having risked everything, sending even the base's personal guard to the courtyard. She deduces that they preferred to bet all chips on the attack, and that probably they also hid some elite martial artists. An ally fears they will stay without reserves, but the mistress reassures everyone saying that underworld reinforcements are on the way to help. The spy questions if anyone really would have courage to face Gyeomju, knowing she possesses the sword family's medallion. Smiling, the mistress confesses that in truth, she had already assumed all responsibility, case things went wrong with the military clan. She jokes saying they do not need to worry, after all, they have the powerful Venerable das Trevas on their side. The mistress plans only to enjoy the dark hero's strength, but is interrupted by a deafening noise coming from inside the temple. Suddenly, a huge and violent explosion destroys part of the main temple structure, spreading fire and smoke everywhere. The explosion impact throws the pavilion mistress far, causing her to lose balance and fall in direction of the floor in the middle of the rubble. Gyu watches the scene shocked and scared, widening her eyes in panic before all that sudden destruction. With the sky covered in ashes and fire sparks, she tries to understand in a desperate way what just happened inside there. Gyu yells for her lady and runs at high speed to hold her before she hits the soil in the middle of that confusion. With swift and precise reflexes, the loyal bodyguard manages to catch the mistress in her arms in the middle of the air and saves her from a fatal impact. Gyu asks, worried if the mistress is fine. While the pavilion leader groans in pain upon trying to recover from the terrible impact, Gyu observes the dense cloud of black smoke that formed and questions herself apprehensive what would have caused that terrible detonation. The main building is completely consumed by gigantic fire blazes, remaining only smoking ruins of the wooden structure. With a maniacal and bloodthirsty expression, she reveals that she will make the terrible dark ritual that her master taught her in the past. Before the terrible, mysterious figure that begins to emerge from the smoke, the pavilion, Mistress stammers scared, unable to believe. From the middle of the fire emerges Gumju, but her appearance changed drastically to something demonic, with popped veins and a dark and violent aura. The grand temple continues burning intensely under the late afternoon sky, spreading a dense curtain of reddish smoke. Pieces of wood and burned tiles fall across all the balcony, while the location continues collapsing because of the arson. Gyu and the mistress defend themselves as they can from the suffocating heat and smoke, trying to maintain their eyes fixed on the threat in their front. The pavilion leader faces the enemy with evident horror. Shocked to see the state in which the adversary faction leader finds herself now, Gumju displays her nails that transformed into sharp and lethal claws, ready to tear apart anyone who crosses her path. Perceiving the imminent attack, the mistress lets out a warning cry upon seeing the opponent advance with an unbelievable speed in their direction. Gyeomju appears laughing in an insane way, with her face deformed and totally consumed by the terrible demonic energy that now runs through her body. The mistress backs away, startled, and questions herself, horrified, how that woman ended up transforming into a monster so scary and hideous. With a sadistic smile and sharp fangs, Gyumju roars the pavilion mistress's title, showing that she wishes to end her personally right there. The villainess leaves for the definitive attack, leaping in direction of them and yelling that the two are going to die right there by her hands. The mistress widens her eyes upon perceiving that the enemy strike speed is too fast to manage to dodge in time. Gyu acts out of pure instinct and leaps with arms extended right in front of her boss to protect her from the lethal impact that approaches. Gyumju attacks fiercely from above, falling directly over the bodyguard who courageously used her own body as a protective shield. While trying to hold the monster, Gyu yells desperate for her lady to enjoy the opportunity and flee from there as soon as possible. In complete despair, the mistress extends her hand and yells by her faithful companion's name upon seeing her sacrifice herself in that manner. She grinds her teeth with anger and frustration upon realizing she does not have enough strength to save her friend at that critical moment. However, she decides she is not going to leave her behind and advances back, yelling that Gyu needs to survive at all costs. In her afflicted thoughts, she claims desperately for the help of the first young master and the feared Venerable das Trevas. The wind blows strong under the dusk, while the flames continue consuming quickly what remained of the criminal base temple. Gyumju snaps her tongue, irritated upon perceiving that her prey managed to escape her claws temporarily. During the confusion, she observes from above the flight attempt of the two women and calls them foolish for thinking they would manage to escape her so easily. Suddenly, a dark figure emerges before the villainess and tells her to stop, decreeing with firmness that her true opponent now is he. Gyeomju turns extremely irritated and furiously orders for them to leave immediately from her path. Gyu refuses to back down and firmly alerts the villainess to move away, in case she does not want to end up dying right there. The bodyguard assumes her fighting stance, affirming she has pride and that she is not going to be defeated so easily. The legend says that all martial artists who seek true power eventually come across an obstacle called wall. As they train and evolve, there comes an inevitable moment in which progress slows down until they jam on this barrier. Those who somehow manage to overcome this obstacle obtain a power so immense that they become totally new people. It is exactly because of this incredible feat that people refer to these strong warriors as supreme masters. Gyu focuses her attention on the combat and perceives the immense disparity of power that exists between her and her terrible opponent. She feels the scary pressure of the energy that Gyeomju is emanating in her front during the direct confrontation. The bodyguard perceives that that unmeasurable force is much superior to hers, who barely managed to approach this such wall. Gyu concludes startled that the enemy leader is clearly a true master who already overcame this barrier a long time ago. Gyumju attacks with her sharp claws, dealing a devastating blow of red energy, while Gyu tries to dodge the two exchange swift and violent strikes in the air. Locking a fierce dispute for survival in the middle of the ruins, Gyeomju's claws tear the air with brutality, leaving trails of red energy where they pass. The villainess deals an insane sequence of aerial strikes, forcing Gyu to use all her agility to manage to dodge. Gyu stays shocked upon noticing the adversary's arm's bizarre speed, which seemed to multiply during the attack. She questions herself, desperate how the enemy manages to perform a combat technique so absurd and swift as that one. A violent impact happens, generating a destructive shockwave that makes the ground shake and spreads debris through the air. Gyeomju laughs loud and asks if she really thought she would be capable of facing her with a power level so pathetic as hers. The villainess continues her implacable sequence. Firing several concentrated energy strikes in the bodyguard's direction, Gyu uses her sword to defend herself as she can from the strike storm, but feels her body being pushed back by the pressure. With the impact of one more heavy strike from the enemy, Gyu's weapon almost slips from her hands due to the crushing force. In a blink of an eye, Gyumju emerges right in front of Gyu's face with a sadistic smile and claws ready for the final attack. The villainess whispers with disdain that annoying insects like her should just vanish from her sight once and for all. She deals a blow from top to bottom with all her brute force, fiercely ordering Gyu to get out of her path. A huge roar happens in the impact location. Lifting a dense dust cloud and destroying the balcony floor, Gyu is struck squarely by the attack violence and ends up being hurled with brutality against the pavilion wall. She falls on her knees on the floor, coughing plenty because of the strong impact that broke the wall behind her and left her without air. Gyumju walks slowly in direction of the fallen bodyguard, while the smoke begins to lower around the fall location. The monstrous villainess stops before Gyu and stares at her from above with a look of total superiority and contempt for her weakness. With derision, Gyumju smiles from ear to ear and comments she is surprised for her not having died even after receiving a blow like that. She admits the girl is even skilled. While Gyu tries to recover breath with extreme difficulty, Gyu perceives she barely managed to avoid death and that the repeated use of her energy technique depleted quickly her inner force. She notices she is not going to endure defending for much longer. Besides the frightening fact of Gyumju fighting without using any weapon, the image of the villainess's monstrous attack with her own bare hands emerges in the injured bodyguard's mind as a danger warning. Gyu questions herself, desperate what type of bizarre transformation would have happened with the enemy faction leader's body. Trembling and without energy, she exerts effort to firmly hold her sword hilt, refusing to deliver the point so easy. Even on knees, Gyu raises her weapon to try to defend from the monstrosity that calmly observes her from above. Gyumju gets irritated with the adversary's silence and complains she did not give any response, even after having received a praise. The villainess calls Gyu a cheeky and insolent girl, causing the bodyguard to back away startled before the imminent danger. Gyumju begins to concentrate an immense amount of red energy around her body, preparing a crushing attack. Gyu feels the terrible and suffocating killing intent that emanates from the opponent and perceives she is about to face the end Gyumju orders, with disdain for her to try to block that strike too, if she is capable of surviving so much fury. The villainess launches the dark and red energy attack with total force in the helpless bodyguard's direction. Gyu closes her eyes and enters into total panic, feeling that will be definitively her last life moment. Suddenly, an immense metal gauntlet emerges in the destructive energy path, blocking the lethal strike with absolute success. Yunga emerges smiling with tranquility in front of Gyu, having used her powerful metal weapon to detain the villainess's attack. Gyu widens her eyes in shock upon seeing she survived, and questions herself, totally incredulous, what just happened there. Still fallen on the balcony, the bodyguard observes the new mysterious ally and questions herself confused, who would be that girl? Yunga only displays a mischievous and confident smile, showing she is ready to face any danger that comes ahead. Gyu is surprised upon seeing the arrival of help, while Yunga asks with a smile if she left them waiting for a long time. At the same instant, a violent blow hurls one of the enemy thugs far, calling everyone's attention on the balcony. The other ally lands in a casual way at Yunga's side, releasing a quick joke upon entering the combat. Yunga waves cheerfully saying she is fine and announces smiling that they too are the reinforcements the pavilion needed. The bearded warrior wields his huge blade and alerts the young Yunga to take care. Since the enemy before them is extremely dangerous, he observes Gyumju's red aura and mentally admits that woman indeed is a very formidable adversary. The warrior hesitates if they will leave alive, but Yunga tries to cheer him up, saying they will win if they work in a team. Gyu says it is impossible to fight only in three, and worriedly asks if really no more reinforcements will come to help. With a funny expression, Yunga confesses that for now they are all that the pavilion managed to send to the location. Without time to lament, the group of three allies positions themselves side by side ahead of the threat. Ready to fight, Gyu firms her hand on the wooden floor, gathering each drop of her remaining inner energy for the confrontation start. She draws her sword and accepts destiny, muttering that they do not have another choice but to fight with all forces. The trio of warriors faces with firmness the enemy leader, who continues floating wrapped in a dense red energy. Gyumju smiles with contempt and asks if they finished conversing, challenging the insects to come all together at once. The sky under the city continues painted in warm tones of orange and yellow, contrasting with the chaos that occurs below in other areas of the main base. The other pavilion combatants continue fighting against the faction thugs. The pavilion mistress observes the situation afflicted, maintaining herself in silence while the flame smoke rises around. The faction temple burns intensely in the middle of explosions, spreading a dense black smoke that covers the roofs. She asks if really there are no more reinforcements available, but the messenger says it is impossible to get help now. Visibly nervous and sweating cold, the mistress tries to reorganize the pavilion forces and summons the 3rd Squadron. One of the officials yells desperate, alerting about the heavy casualties suffered, and orders the immediate retreat of the survivors. She stays shocked upon receiving another urgent report, informing that the 17th Squadron is pleading for support. Upon listening that the 10th Squadron also is retreating, the mistress despairs and questions how everything could go so wrong. The despair screams and the noise of swords colliding continue echoing through all the base under the sun's reddish light. One of the pavilion warriors tries to strike the huge bald giant, but the brute blocks the attack easily. The spy forces his sword against the opponent's heavy weapon. Feeling the tremendous fatigue before that physical barrier, he widens his eyes in panic upon perceiving that the adversary possesses a monstrous and out-of-the-ordinary physical strength. The giant of red eyes simply ignores the sword driven in his belly and continues facing the enemy with fury. The warrior panics upon noticing that the monster took a direct blade in the belly and does not even seem to be feeling pain. The brute deals an avassalador kick from top to bottom, hurling the injured combatant against the base floor. The violent blow impact causes the pavilion warrior to suffer a terrible fatal injury during the brutal fall. The ally's body falls lifeless on the courtyard floor, leaving another companion horrified with that violent end. One more tattooed criminal attacks with cruelty, cutting another ally in the middle of that bloody dispute for territory. The lethal fights continue without truce through all parts, with thugs and spies in brutal confrontations in the middle of the flames. One of the pavilion officials yells from terror upon witnessing his soldiers being decimated by the enemy forces without pity. He laments startled that the situation left control and that it seems that savage demons are destroying everything there. The spy observes the terrible destruction around him with widened eyes, swallowing dry before all that scene. He concludes in panic that that location in flames and covered in bodies in truth transformed into hell itself on earth. Back to the hall, Gyu protects the fallen Yunga, while Geumju mocks in a sadistic way, asking if that is all they have. Wrapped in her terrible energy of red flames, the villainess laughs and says she imagined that they would last much longer. Gyu grinds her teeth furious upon seeing her battle companion's state, who is gravely injured right behind her. The green spiritual medallion on Yunga's waist begins to crack in a violent way, releasing a strange magical smoke. Yunga ends up spitting blood due to the severe internal injuries, leaving her companion extremely worried. Geumju lets out a hysterical laugh of derision, affirming that observing the weakest suffer is always her greatest pleasure. She promises with irony to send their young master to the beyond next, so that none of them feels solitary after Gyu and the young Junga only listen to the provocations in absolute silence, maintaining their eyes focused on the scary enemy Gyu recalls with anguish from when she ordered desperate for her beloved lady to flee from that temple as soon as possible. She questions herself in thought if her leader managed to escape in safety and distance herself from that terrible massacre. With her injured and trembling hand, the faithful bodyguard squeezes with strength her sword hilt, gathering the last forces to fight. She decides with bravery that even if there is no any chance of victory against that monster, she will resist until the combat end. Even injured and tired, Gyu faces the opponent with determination and firmly affirms that she still refuses to back down a single step. Geumju decides to end the conversation and concentrates her red energy, saying for her to wait for her young master in the beyond. The villainess attacks pitilessly with a devastating dark energy blow, forcing Gyu to try to defend herself in the middle of the hall in flames. The bodyguard is struck scraping by the terrible shockwave and widens her eyes upon perceiving the adversary's crushing strength. In the middle of the combat panic, the pavilion mistress observes the scene horrified and stammers scared upon seeing her faithful bodyguard in danger. Suddenly, a bizarre sound calls everyone's attention in the room, causing the mistress to turn quickly with a surprised expression. A strange atmosphere spreads instantly through the location, paralyzing the pavilion leader in an absolute and scary silence. She feels the sudden change in the environment and questions herself confused what would be happening to leave everything in that so bizarre state. Both allies as enemies stay paralyzed when the world around them darkens completely, as if the light had been devoured. Trembling from terror in the sudden darkness, the pavilion mistress embraces her own arms and comments surprised about the absurd chill she feels. A gelid mist leaves her mouth at each breath, while a deep and silent darkness like night swallows all the battlefield time seems to slow down for the warriors who were fighting, freezing each movement and silencing the combat chaos. The freezing darkness spreads quickly through all the outer courtyard, leaving thugs and spies paralyzed and confused. All present manage to feel the heavy pressure of that scary energy at the same instant in which a silent step echoes in the location. It is the clear sign of the start of an absolute darkness that involves the grand temple in flames, bringing along a mortal silence. At that exact moment of complete silence and terror, the pavilion mistress widens her single eye upon perceiving a familiar presence. A white and unfinished mask, which seems to mock the entire world, emerges in an imposing way from the middle of a dense, brilliant purple energy. A quiet and enigmatic voice echoes through the silent darkness, softly asking if they were waiting for his arrival. The mistress stammers, completely shocked with what she sees at her front, recognizing immediately the mystical figure that just revealed itself. It deals with the feared white-faced Grim Reaper, the powerful Venerable das Trevas, who emerges imposing with his dark energy to save the day.